realize when we're trying to get there, but
and
we
it'll
didn't
be a lot
have
of
the
the same
data.
thing,
and
you know?
the,
Okay.
IT staff and all that to gather all that data. Also, it took hours for us to.
All right, good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the August 2nd, 2021 working meeting of the Mequon-Thiensville School District Board of Education, and please note the time is 7:01 PM. Per board policy, Wendy Francoeur, the board's vice president, will facilitate tonight's working meeting. Thank you, Madam President. For a quick notice regarding public access to the meeting, I would like to introduce Ms. Amanda Severs, who will be supporting our meeting, our hybrid meeting this evening. Amanda?
Thank you, Ms. Francoeur. This working meeting of the Board of Education is being held as a hybrid meeting, allowing access by the public both in person and virtually. Each board member attending is accessing the meeting this evening in person. Tonight's meeting was noticed in accordance with open meeting laws, and members of the public were given meeting access information via the meeting notice within the meeting agenda and on the school district's public website. Per board policy 0166, working meetings do not include public comment. Reasonable accommodations have been made for members of the public who wish to participate in tonight's board meeting and who have given notice to the district's chief of staff. Additionally, this meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public upon request. And that concludes my notice of public access, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Amanda. At this time, I would like to ask all of those who are participating in the meeting to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you to all joining the Board of Education meeting this evening. As a reminder, the meeting audio for all participants joining us virtually will be managed by the host of the meeting. It is also requested that members of the public attending the meeting remotely keep their personal videos turned off. If you have comments or questions for the Board of Education on tonight's agenda items, please feel free to submit those to Amanda Severs via email following the meeting, and she will distribute the comments to the Board of Education. As stated previously, per board policy, working meetings do not include an agenda item for public comment. We're going to move now into our discussion items.
Vice President Francoeur, just real quick. Chester, are you able to turn the volume up on the speaker behind the board?
Yeah, I don't think it's working.
It's not working.
Check, microphone, check, check.
Are you able to hear me? There's nothing coming out of that speaker. No. What about the monitor?
No, it's not coming out of this.
I believe he has the monitors behind you for our virtual participants and for the other microphones in the room, but not your microphone.
We'll have to talk louder from up here.
Okay,
This is not working.
It will work for your virtual participants. It's not hooked up to these microphones. We're up here together, so we'll just have to project our voices across the stage.
so if anyone cannot hear us, just raise your hand and we'll accommodate. So we're going to move now into discussion items. And first on our agenda is a presentation from ECRA Group regarding Mequon-Thiensville School District academic growth. First up, for this report, we are joined by Dr. Gina Simonik, President of the ECRA Group. Welcome, Dr. Simonik.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Just also want to acknowledge I have one of my colleagues, Dr. Kate Story, is probably listening virtually as well, and she worked closely with me as we put this presentation together for you this evening. So I'm pleased to be here. For those of you that are not familiar, I know I am familiar with some of the board members, but it looks like there's some that I may not have met in the past. But ECRA is a research and analytics firm, and we tend to focus really on rigorous approaches to measurement for student success and really helping districts measure the impact of school improvement initiatives and really understand what programs or what initiatives are most impactful for student success. So We're going to walk through a little bit of that framework. And Amanda, if you can advance the slide, please. So we're going to try to structure this around really student achievement and how we think about and the dialogue, that the best way to frame this. So we're going to talk a little bit about proficiency, which is achievement status or attainment, academic growth as well, and then gaps in both status and growth. And so the presentation will be framed around this. We'll have time certainly at the end for question and dialogue, and I'll probably stop a few times throughout the presentation just to check that there aren't any burning questions. But again, please feel free if you do have something immediately to just interrupt and we can address it then. Next slide, please. So again, to frame how ECRA approaches our analytic framework and what we've done for you in the district there, there's proficiency and status, which is really that attainment or point in time. It could refer to an individual student score. It may be a percentage of students that are meeting grade level standards. But the idea is there, it's a status point. Growth, on the other hand, is looking at how much students learn or grow across multiple assessments over time. And we like to make sure that we're looking at growth in the context of status so we understand how good is growth. Because in the absence of some comparison, growth in and of itself can be misleading. So we always try where possible to make sure we're understanding it within the context also of where the performance is currently at. So next slide, please. So this slide provides a visual of the framework. So what ECRA has done here is, and we I guess we know this as scientists, that if you can't really run experimental designs, it's not very easy to do in schools. The next best thing is really studying longitudinally the individual student level and tracking performance and growth over time. And when you do that at the individual student level, it really allows you to answer very important questions around the impact that your programs and interventions and different initiatives are having. So what ECRA does is we study, and we've done this in your district for every student, we look at their historical growth, historical performance on multiple assessments, and then we use that to train our analytic models to say, given what we know about each student and the local performance in the district, what's the most likely trajectory for each and every student for the following school year? And then the metric for growth is really based on a model of projection versus actual. And then we standardize that into an effect size, and using effect sizes allows us to leverage many years of research with effect sizes that then you can aggregate it across student groups, across assessments, programs, and all the way up to the district level. So again, growth in our framework is how a student performed relative to other students with the same performance history. It's based on every individual student's own performance, so it's personalized for every student. It's an important concept that we'll come back to. Next slide, please. So with that sort of framework, that local framework, it's an improvement framework. It answers very important questions about things that people in the district, the leadership and staff are responsible for day in and day out. Certainly monitoring individual student learning and personalizing that and understanding, at the individual student level, how a child is progressing and learning. RTI, or response to intervention, is one of, I think, the most powerful use cases for this type of modeling. Any district or school improvement that is related to academic outcomes is a great use case for this model. Program evaluation and return on investment, if you are keeping track of which students are being served by certain programs and interventions, this model will answer the question of impact through the lens of an effect size, so it can actually quantify academic growth, where then the leadership can take a look at the financial spending on a particular program and look at the effect size for growth, and then make some determination of that ROI. So inequity and impact, at the end of the day, because the growth is personalized for every student, that allows you to actually drill down into student groups and look at, is our curriculum and our programs growing students equitably? And in some cases where there are growth gaps or achievement gaps, it allows you to monitor and that action theory, sort of a theory of action, where if you're implementing particular programs, interventions, then you should expect to see them accelerate growth. And this model allows you to actually measure that. So sort of a foundational backdrop of the framework for growth, of how we actually look at data in the district, and then some of the probably top applications for it. It's a very systemic framework that can be weaved, very systemically through the district. Next. So we're going to start first with elementary grades 2 through 8, I believe we have. And what we're looking at here is local growth as well as status. So as I said earlier, status at point in time, that's the percent that met the benchmark. You're looking at across subjects. This is across NWEA, MAP, and forward. So I think it's grades 2 through 8 because MAP probably goes down to second grade in our framework. And then across all subjects, which I'd said, once we've converted growth into this metric of an effect size, we can easily aggregate that all the way up to the top, to the district level. And then we look at thresholds that are anchored to science to say how much shift from 0 or what's the effect size that is deemed significant or relevant, educationally. So we do 2 tests. We test if it is statistically significant, and then we look at these thresholds. Say, is it educationally relevant? Does it mean anything? And those thresholds for what's expected, which would really just represent expected fluctuation, would be in that green zone between the absolute values of 0.3. So if it's in the green zone, you're growing at consistent rates that was expected. It's just normal fluctuation. If you're growing and accelerating growth at a higher than expected rate and it's statistically significant, it would be blue or above that 0.3. And the lower end would either shift to yellow or red. So this color schema makes it very easy to view. Now, one thing I want to say with this growth that we're looking at this year, the nice thing is it's an improvement framework. So we have pre-pandemic norms. And what I'm seeing here is at the highest level across subjects, all students, the overall growth is a negative 0.22, which is in the expected range. And then by each subject, also in the expected range. And math is very close to 0. 0 would indicate students are all meeting their projections, which were anchored to pre-pandemic standards. So at a high level, students are performing consistent with pre-pandemic levels, indicating no gross loss of learning at a district level. We'll drill into that a little bit though, and you'll see where that you start to peel that onion a little bit. Advance to the next slide, please. Okay, so here again, status and growth. We're breaking it down now into the grade levels. So this is math for, again, MAP and forward. You can see each grade level. The percent met benchmark, now there's a MAP benchmark, which if you're familiar with the NWEA assessment, it's on a RIT scale. And that test publisher did their own equating study, and the benchmark in our data that is utilized comes from their equating study, their linking study, which I believe linked to the 70th and the 66th percentile for math and in reading, which in their research indicates that they're on track for ACT college and career readiness. The forward is your state cut score. So again, you're looking across grade level, each assessment, the percentage of students, and this is for this spring, that met those benchmarks or the equated benchmark. And then the overall growth, you'll see the growth for MAP and the growth for forward. Now, looking again across grade levels, when we saw on the previous slide at the district level, you were really at the pre-pandemic standards indicating no gross loss of learning given the pandemic. Here you can see a lot of green as well. There is yellow growth in second grade on the MAP test. Forward doesn't start until third grade, of course, but then there's blue growth in third and fourth grade, indicating that third and fourth grade on the state test had accelerated. They learned at higher rates than they were learning before the pandemic. That's actually very impressive. That's not what we typically are seeing this spring. Again, this is for math, and then we'll switch to the next slide and look at reading and ELA. So here you're going to see it really varies more by grade and test. So math, much more consistent performance and growth in the district. ELA and reading, a little bit more variation. But when I'm looking at the state test at far right column, most grades came in at pre-pandemic levels, showing that there really wasn't a lot of learning loss. 8th grade is in the yellow, lower than expected. On MAP, you can see 8th grade is even red. They're even further below that negative 0.6. It shifts to red, which means there's been some significant learning loss. And then you can see the percent met benchmark for both assessments as well. The next slide, please. So we've looked at status, we've looked at growth together to see what percentage are meeting, how are they growing. And now we're going to look at some achievement gaps. And that's really important to look at gaps, not only in proficiency, much like you might see on your state report card, but also growth gaps. And we'll walk through a couple examples. So on the far left, you'll see all your student groups, or at least the federal designations, the sample size in each group, and then the percent met benchmark, and then the overall growth for the group. So I've highlighted a couple of, I framed a couple boxes. So the first one there is students with an IEP and students without an IEP. That first box that shows the benchmark. Students in the district, this is for mathematics, with an IEP, only 26% of them are meeting the grade level standards or the equated standards, while students that do not have an IEP, 62% are meeting the benchmark. So that's your achievement gap in terms of proficiency, much like you might see on a state report card. Similarly, the free and reduced lunch or the limited English proficiency, those are achievement gaps through the lens of proficiency. But when we follow that, like the IEP row over to the right, you're going to see that the students designated with an IEP are growing at lower than expected rates, while students without an IEP are in the green zone. They're growing at typical pre-pandemic rates. That would indicate that the gap is widening. The good news is 111 students and we're at a district level. So when they start to really dig into this data, that becomes, those numbers become much more manageable when you break it down in each building, each grade level, and really take a look at students with an IEP. Do they have the right accommodations? Do they need more of something? Do they need something different? But they're able to actually drill into the students that are impacted this way and that are showing lower than expected growth. And then on the bottom, the limited English proficiency, again, you see the achievement gap where 35% meet the benchmark compared to 60%. But now look at the growth. Now they're both green, but that group, limited English proficiency, they're approaching that positive 0.3. So that trend is in a nice positive movement, indicating that if they continue on that trajectory, that gap will begin to close. To close achievement gaps, we have to grow the group of students that have historically performed lower. We have to grow them faster. They have to run faster than the rest of the pack to catch up, or that gap is either going to persist if both groups are growing at consistent rates, or it's going to widen if the lower performing group is growing at lower rates. So in this case, you want to create a growth gap, but you want the lower performing students to grow faster than the average student that's not in that student group. That makes sense. So that's math. Let's take a look at reading and ELA. Here at ELA, you're going to see a lot more variation in the growth by student group. And then you can see the IEP here, again, a similar trend, only the growth is for this reading in ELA is in the red, which is much more significantly below. And then free and reduced lunch group, and you can see that there's greater variation there. But the same idea, we want to reverse that to close the gap, not only to close the gap, but you want to really create a gap where the lower performing group is growing blue. In our schema, that would be blue. Are there any questions so far? So
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the sample size, can you talk to the sample size off slide? I don't know, they're not numbered, but maybe it's slide 5.
Page number.
Oh, I apologize.
6,
Mine cut off. 6.
page 6. Is that
If you have a sample size of 1,400 students approximately, yet we have 3,400 in the district, what does that sample size represent?
A little difficult to hear you, but I think you're asking the sample size. So this is only MAP and forward. So forward is only grades 3-8, MAP is 2-8. And this would be the students that took those tests. So you're not going to have kindergarten, first grade. You're not going to have any high school in here.
So this is every child that took the MAP and the forward testing from 2nd to 8th grade in one case and 3rd to 8th grade in another, correct?
That's correct for this spring of 2021.
What does, it says overall growth, and you have this negative number to a positive number, like for example, expected growth, negative 0.29 to positive 0.29. And you said 0, is 0 at grade level, or what does 0 really represent?
It's a good question. So 0 represents typical growth. These are growth thresholds. So our models are local. We've built them local to represent what is typical growth, because this is an improvement framework. If you know what what progress looks like and what's typical for every grade level and subject, you
Okay.
can now evaluate against those fixed standards of what's typical or expected to know if your programs and your interventions and your improvement efforts are having an impact. So we center the model at 0 at the district level so that you have something to compare against every year.
So is 0.28 plus 30% better than 0? Am I reading that correctly, or is that not? how
Yeah, it's so it's an effect size. Think of that as a portion of a standard deviation where the mean is 0 and the standard deviation is 1. So 0.28 is a third of a standard deviation, or
So
28%.
consider it a percentage where you'd say 30% are above 0, 30% are below 0. And that's,
Well, it's a third of a standard deviation. It's a metric of, it goes from the mean 0 and plus or minus 1 for a full standard deviation.
okay.
So an effect size of negative 0.22, think of that as, 22% of a standard deviation. It's the magnitude of the shift from 0. It's not the number of students. It's the magnitude of how far did we shift from 0 to say something other than what was expected or typical has occurred. And when it's shifting negative, that's showing that there's an issue that these kids are not growing at the rates they were expected to, given their own prior history that's been observed and the model that's been projecting their personalized projection.
Got it.
When it shifts positive, you're showing that there's been value added and there's whatever that's being employed is working because they're growing them at higher rates.
Got it. So when you're at 0.28, you're just a tenth of or a hundredth of a point away from less than expected. Can we then
Yes.
assume that ELA and reading, that sample group then is a composite of all 1,400 kids? Some will be much higher in achievement and some will be much lower. At
That's
some
correct.
point, can we disseminate the ones that are low versus the ones that are high? Because obviously we're not interested for the sake of academic recovery and the ones that are excelling and are exceeding growth expectations. We're more interested in the ones that are potentially have some learning loss or are behind, if you follow my question.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, the district does have access to drill right down to every individual student. So this is at the very high level. As I said, think about this as we're going to peel the onion and we start to dig in from the district to the grade level. And they do have the tools and the analytics
Great.
available within the buildings as well.
Right, because I think in my mind, I want to know how many students. I don't want a percentage. I want to know how many students are we up against, because 50% of 2 is 1. 50% of 1,000 is 500, right?
Absolutely. Good question.
Thank you.
Hi, Tina. This is Paula Table. On that same slide, I was curious what local refers to. Can you define local?
Yes, local means that we built this analytical framework is local to your school district only.
Okay,
So
so it is MTSD.
that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe one last question. You always mention this MET benchmark. What is the benchmark represent?
So the benchmark, in this case, what we've done is we've collapsed across MAP and forward. MAP is what I mentioned earlier, NWEA, their benchmark is their RIT score that equates to their 70th national percentile for math and the 66th national percentile for reading. So those RIT scores are different in every grade level. But whatever those RIT scores are in each grade level, that's the benchmark that they have indicated, the test publishers indicated means if students meet this, they're on track, it's aligned to the college readiness benchmark.
So, okay, so it's a college readiness benchmark. It's not a national average or standard.
No, it's their linking study though. It is MAP NWEA's own, they've done that work. That's their linking study to ACT. Then forward benchmark is the state's issued benchmark, and that should theoretically be aligned to the college and career readiness as well, as most state tests are. They have been designed to be aligned to that.
One last question for me anyways, and that is, I had heard, and I don't know if this is true, and maybe you can answer this question, maybe you cannot, but the MAPS test I had heard last year changed. I know it changes from year to year, but I heard it was actually simplified and perhaps made quote easier. Can you comment on, or do you have any knowledge of what that MAP standard is? And if it has been adjusted for the pandemic, or if it was the same caliber of test that was given before the pandemic?
Right.
I don't know,
So,
maybe you don't know that, I don't know, I'm just asking.
yeah, no, actually I do have some great insights into MAP. So they've done two things recently. They recalibrated their early grades, their K2 model. So their assessment for K2, they actually recalibrated the items. So that is like a whole new test, K2. Second to that, what they've done is they've renormed. So every 5 years or so, they do this. They look back at all their national data and they look at where the average student on their national sample is performing. And then they have to reset that whole norming standard for percentiles. So they did do that. It was unfortunate timing because they released that in July and August of 2020, right? During the pandemic, but I know they likely started that work prior to that. But that is when they released it, which is why I'm going to move away from local and I'm going to start looking at, so local is great for improvement framework, knowing what you're doing inside the district that's working because they have the tools to connect that, to dig into the kids and say which programs. You want to look at external, like, national information when you really want to answer a different question. You want to know how do we compete? You have to look outside your window and you have to look at some external standard. So that's the beauty of MAP. And when we look at the next few screens, you're going to see that I stopped it at last winter, right before COVID, because they renormed and you can no longer compare them now. So they've essentially started themselves all over with they reset in August of 20. So
I'm not sure I understood that. Something was reset in August of 20?
Yes, they renormed. The test company renormed all of their sample data, meaning that 70th percentile on the MAP test that I mentioned is their benchmark. That would be now a different RIT score than it had been in the past. So every RIT score is now anchored to a different national percentile ranking. That's for them to renorm, they had to say, where is the middle of our pack nationally? Where's the score for every grade and subject at the 50th percentile? The national 50th percentile is where the average student is performing in the nation in their assessments. And after so many years, if students are either performing really high or not a lot of students are meeting that 50th percentile, they reset and they renorm to make sure that they're anchored to the right 50th percentile.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, if in 2020 or years prior to that, if the national average dropped, then so would the benchmark.
So the benchmark actually would go up. That's the interesting thing. The benchmark would go up. Essentially, student performance was dropping, so they renormed because not many students were getting to the benchmark. So they renormed that to find where is the real 50th percentile. But in some cases, when you start to shift away from that, the national percentile for their benchmark is up in the 70th percentile. So when the higher you shift away from the middle of the pack, the higher that number goes because fewer kids are getting there. It's a little confusing.
Yeah, I don't really get it, but
Yeah.
we can take it offline unless somebody else.
That's
wants.
fine. Yes. Okay. Let's move on and take a look at outside the window. We'll look at some national benchmarking. Here we go. So first glance, again, this is on their last set of norms, which were normed in 2015. And it's looking from 2015 all the way through the winter of 1920. This would have been the winter assessment in the district right before schools started to close due to the pandemic. And here you can see what we've looked at is math is your blue line, reading is this orange line. And what's very evident is that your students are performing well above the nation. The national average is the 50th percentile, which is on the left on that y-axis. And 50 is not even on the scale. Your average students are performing in the top 25 percentile of the national norm. It's in both math and reading. If we want to take a look at that next one, we're going to break it down into some grade levels now because it was a very high level at the district level. When we start to look within subject and grade, this is mathematics. Now we're looking at the new norms because I want to take a look at now what's happened with the new norms. So this is this spring of 2021 and see how our students performing now. We just can't connect the two because you can't look at the 2020 norms against the 15. So looking just at this year, grade level, spring of 2021 on their current norms, the black horizontal line is the national 50th percentile. You see that? That's where the average student performs on this assessment in the nation. The 3 lines, if you look at the red line, that's your local. This is MTSD's local 25th percentile. The green line is your local 50th percentile. The 50th percentile is where your average performers are. And then the blue line is your 75th percentile. So you've got your top 25% on the blue line, you have your lower 25% in the red, and your average students are the green. And what's most evident is even your lowest, your bottom 25 percentile, they're all performing above the national average. Your average students, the green line, they're in the 75th to 80 percentile. Very high performing. And then let's take a look at reading on their assessment as well. Again, similar picture here where the 50th percentile, your 25th, your lower 25th percentile are performing at the nation's 50th percentile. And your average students are again 75, hovering around the 75th percentile. Okay, and then we're gonna take a look, we're gonna bounce over to forward now. Again, though, looking outside of just your district, and now we're looking across the state of Wisconsin. So what we've done here is taken the average forward score. We start this at the individual student level in your district, and then we aggregate the average score in each grade level all the way up to the district, okay, by subject. And then we did the same thing with the entire public state file, which this is why it only goes back to 1819, because there was no 1920 data, and we don't have the 2021 state file available yet. So what we're looking at here is the solid lines up on the top. The orange are all of your students in ELA, and then the solid blue line are all of your students in math. So once we've done that, we can create this percentile ranking of students and then all the way up to the district. So you're looking across years, the high level district percentile, where you basically rank against all other districts in the state of Wisconsin. And you can clearly see you're in the 96th percentile, 95th percentile in ELA, and in the 93, 94, 92 percentile in math. What's really important though is when we look at the student group on economically disadvantaged, we did the same process by looking at individual students that are disadvantaged in your district against everyone across the state basically. And here you're going to see those dashed lines and just an incredible acceleration to where in 1819, these are students in your district, economically disadvantaged, performing better than 78% of the students in the state, which is just it's a great story when you look at the climb over those, from 1617 to 1819. There, again, top 20% of the state against third disadvantaged students as well. If we want to advance, Amanda. Oh, okay. So now we actually are going to move into high school. So let me stop there for a moment. Do you have any questions on forward or any of those last few slides?
Just one comment on the forward. Why are we missing the 2020? They can't get us data after 2 years?
No, the closure, there was no state test.
There was no data in 2020. Yeah.
Okay, and 2021 wasn't available?
It's not available yet. The state probably won't release that. In order for us to create percentile rankings, we have to have the state file.
Okay.
That probably won't come out for several months, usually October, November. So we took it as far as we could, but again, just to follow that
Pandemic hit and they
trend.
This is Shelley Burns. Is the economically disadvantaged student cohort the same as the free and reduced lunch? Okay, thanks.
Yes, they're called different things in different files. So we
Okay.
wanted to make sure we were using the right, because this came from the state file. So yes.
Thank
it
you.
is. Mhm.
you get that.
Okay, then we'll move on to high school. So here we started again with this year looking at growth. Again, first looking internally at local growth across Aspire and ACT for grades 9, 10, 11, and you'll see there's variation. I'm looking across the middle here of 10th grade. Aspire seems to have the most consistent growth across subjects, meaning in most subjects, students were growing at pre-pandemic rates. Other subjects, if you look at math, up and down vertically, all grades came in at lower than expected in math. Reading, 10 and 11 came in at typical rates, but lower in ninth grade. So this just gets at the variation. And here, again, this is anchored to pre-pandemic standards. So at first glance, it's giving you that idea of where do we have to go to look to drill in to really identify the students. And even where you're seeing green or blue growth at a high level, you're going to find students in there as well that need to, have some recovery as well. But at a high level, this gives you at the district level a glance at overall growth. On the next slide, we'll take a look at percent meeting. This is just the proficiency standards across again to take a look at 9, 10, 11. This is this spring on the ACT or the Aspire readiness benchmarks. Okay, and then we'll take a look on the next slide, Amanda. So here what we're looking at is ACT composite score. Now, because we're looking at percentiles again, so we need to have all the state data for this. So we're looking at this from 2015 through 1920. Grade 11, now this is the official grade 11 that's required, that's reported by the state, for the official numbers. You can see that Mequon is consistently in the top 2% of the state. And in 1920, you ranked the 5th highest out of 383 districts in the state of Wisconsin. And this is for the, the overall ACT composite. And then the next slide, we're going to take a look at Mequon compared to the state, as well as we're going to look at some of the student group again for the free and reduced lunch or the economically disadvantaged. So top line, red line is Mequon. Solid yellow line is the state. You're of course way above the state consistently for the last 6 years or so. And the economically disadvantaged, again, you're going to see Mequon, the red dash line, really make a nice increase in from 1819 to 1920 to where you've approached the state average for all students, not even, the economically disadvantaged. Again, this is grade 11 only, the ACT composite score.
This is
And
Paula
the next slide.
Table. Hi, Gina. Paula Table. Can you remind me what year is the year that Wisconsin mandated all 11th grade students to take the ACT? Was that 15, 16 or 16, 17?
Oh, Matt, I might have to defer to you on that one. I'm not sure which year.
The year the juniors all took the ACT would be reflected. They took it 14, 15, it would be reflected in the graduating class of 2016. Note that this is the grade 11
Right.
assessment. So that would be the year previous to what's shared here in this chart.
But I think, didn't it become the state required assessment prior to 15, 16, or was that the year it became a required test for 11th graders?
Required test for 11th graders in the 14, 15 school year.
Okay.
A lot of times we look at the composite ACT score as that of the graduating class. So in the data that is most often reviewed in the district here, that would be reflected in the graduating class of 2016. On
Okay.
this chart, which is specific to grade 11, it would be for the 14, 15 school year. This chart starts at 15, 16.
Thank you.
And many of our students take that ACT assessment more than once. So this would be the first time that all students are taking it. And then it's a student choice to continue to take it into their senior year. And many of our students do that.
Right. That was my question, was the year that all students had to take it versus those who chose to take it. So that's the 14, 15 school
Yes.
year for 11th graders.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I noticed too, this does have 2021. Is that estimated? Or I just noticed your title went through 1920. Is this an estimated end or actual?
No, those are your actual. We don't have the state. So this was very, very last minute to get your
Oh,
current
good.
numbers on there. Yeah,
Great.
we don't have the state yet. Okay, and then we're going to take a look at the next slide, Amanda. It's going to break it down by subject again. Taking a look here at the solid bars are red is Mequon according to the state. And if you look by subject, and then following that is economically disadvantaged. What I would point out is that MEC1's economically disadvantaged is above the state average again in every subject except for math, where it's 18.3. And you're certainly above the state in all subject areas as well. Just again, trying to drill it down to understanding the strengths and areas that might warrant a little bit additional focus. Okay, and then we're going to switch now and take a look at a little bit of AP data that we were able to evaluate. So on the left side here, those two charts in yellow are both states. So those are statewide information for Wisconsin. And then to the right, the two charts on the right in red are MEC1. So the top left, we're going to look at the number of students taking at least one AP exam statewide. What I'm going to point out is you'll see after 17-18, it peaks in the state, and then there's a steady decline. If you go across to the right to the district, you're going to see in 17-18, there's a peak and then there's a slight decline, but then the students in MEC1, again, this is ending in 1920 on here, end up at the highest number of students taking exams, at least in the last 5 years. And then the bottom two charts show this is the total number of exams taken. So you first have the number of students on the top that have taken one exam, and then the bottom chart is the number of exams taken. Again, you're going to see that same pattern of the state peaking in 17-18 and then the steady decline. And when you go to the right and you look at your data, you're going to again see that there's a dip, and then you come right back up again to some of the highest numbers that you've seen since 2015. And again, we don't have the most recent data yet. I don't know when the state releases it. It's likely with the rest of their state reporting though. And let's look at the next slide. Here we have, of course, always an interesting indicator is what, the success, scoring a 3 or above on AP exams. The red is MEC1 and statewide. You see state's been pretty flat for years. They hover around 65, 66%, but there's this nice steady incline for the district. Again, this is at 1920. Last year, you're at 78% basically of exams that are successful in terms of scoring a 3 or higher. And then the last slide in here is really just to take a look at, just descriptively where the assessments are, the interest for students. The largest amount of tests that you're going to see are English, history and social science, sciences, math, and computer sciences in terms of, your tests and the number of tests in each of those areas. Okay, I'm going to pause here before we move on to one other area that I'd like to share with you. Any other questions on high school data at all, or anything else we've discussed so far? Okay, then let's advance. What I'd like to do now is share, just to put things a little bit in context again, to give you a little view outside of what, how are other districts growing. So this is a preliminary study that we conducted just a month ago, very early in June. It is preliminary. We did this based on ECRA clients that had their spring data completed and in. As we started to receive it, we really wanted to get a handle on what things look like for growth and to get an understanding of this idea of learning loss, or what we prefer to call unfinished learning, after we started to study and see what was actually happening. We will be updating this as the state tests are coming in and clients are, we're waiting on a lot of high school data still. That's all coming in. So we'll end up doing a high school review as well. So we anticipate updating this in the next month or so as more data come in. But to share this, let's take a look at the next slide. Our goal here really was to help quantify the magnitude of this idea of unfinished learning or learning loss, due to school closures or the hybrid and remote learning. Every district, like I shared with you, your local growth, but all of our clients are like, well, what are other districts like? We can't compare your growth directly to their, like your growth doesn't port to theirs because it's localized, but are we the only district that's not growing? Or, everybody wants that answer. So we wanted to be able to take a look and try to quantify the magnitude of what we're seeing. And also to make sure that there was this framework for school leaders to understand how to drive growth recovery. And I'd shown some of that in the beginning about the whole framework of our modeling and then our tools that the district does have available to identify kids to go in and start their recovery work. So let's go to the next slide and I'll walk you through again. This looks a little different, but it's the same idea that I showed you at the beginning here. The idea of personalized projections is critical here. So data leading up to the winter of 2020, because that's when schools started to close. So this examination of growth is really over a 15-month period from the winter of 2020 through the end of the school year in the spring, through June, basically. So again, we have pre-pandemic standards set for what typical growth looks like. So we know based on, personalized data for every student, had schools not closed, we set these personalized projections to say, this is where you're likely to land next spring if you've not been impacted by COVID, because we know that based on the way we've trained the models and the data that we have. And then when the students actually took their recent spring test and we received the actual performance, we actually measure the difference between what was observed actually and what the personalized projection from the model had indicated. And we convert that to that effect size for unfinished learning. And if we take a look here, you'll recognize our thresholds again. So again, using this projected versus actual, that's really what allows us to express the difference of that projected versus actual in an effect size and leverage that sort of that science and research around, what's meaningful in education and how much of a shift from zero means something different happened. So if students, by design, we know that if growth is zero, we know that there's really been no learning loss or no unfinished learning because they're hitting their projections based on pre-pandemic norms and they're learning at consistent rates. If they're blue or above the point +30, we know that growth is they're growing at higher rates than pre-pandemic. And we do have districts that had students grow better than they had been prior to that. And of course, there's also evidence of unfinished learning, which is either yellow or red, just depending on the magnitude of that effect size. Red is obviously a little bit more significant and would require more comprehensive interventions, probably for a longer period of time to help them recover. So that framework is the same framework here. Let's take a look at the next slide. So some of our preliminary findings was there's definitely evidence that students have made progress. So there's also strong evidence that there's unfinished learning. And definitely this pandemic has not been, impacting all students in the same way. There's a lot of evidence it's asymmetric. We saw that in your data when we looked at those student groups, that groups are growing in yellow, green, red, just depends. That's the idea that they're not all growing at consistent rates. So that next slide, I'm going to walk you through what we actually found. So in order to understand if there was no learning, like if absolutely nobody learned, there was no progress made at all, what would that look like? So that would essentially mean that students ended this spring at the same place that they left off last winter before schools closed. If there was no learning, that means no progress. They would have ended this spring where they were last winter. We also know on the far right side that if there was no loss of learning or no unfinished learning, their growth would be close to zero, meaning they kept pace. Now, we saw a lot of green growth in your district at a high level. So what did we actually observe when we looked at this data for ELA and reading? If there was no progress at all, that effect size would have been a -1.21. So this is a benefit of that model because we were actually able to model that and model through to say what would the effect size be if there was no change from no growth at all. Be a -1.21, red. What we actually observed in the ECRA study was a -0.41, yellow, that observed effect size. And if you're looking to the far right, 0 would have been no unfinished learning. So when you're going between these extremes, the yellow of a -4.1 would indicate that most districts in this sample, they got students about 2/3 the way there to where they would have been had there been no impact from the pandemic. Now, where does MECWAN fall? Your data for ELA reading was a -0.28. So you see that vertical arrow there. So you're in between there and you're in the green zone. That's a lot that could be, considered just in the expected range, but yes, you are approaching that -0.3. You're very close, but there's still not enough evidence to say anything other than was expected happened at a very high level. I'll tell you that that's very good. We have observed districts that had no learning, believe it or not, that were worse than that negative 1.21. We do see clients' overall growth worse than that negative 1.21. We also have districts who didn't have any loss. They were above the zero or higher. So you're right close to zero, and you're definitely not where we saw the average district. So you came in much better than the average of what we've seen. And this is ELA and reading. Let's take a look at, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Shelley Burns. So who's our comparator group in here?
So the districts, these are all ECRA clients that we had the early spring data on that we were able to run this for in early June. So there's I think this sample might have about 28,000 students in it.
Okay.
And about how many school districts does that represent, Gina? This is
Oof.
Paula.
I'm guessing, I don't have that number honestly, but I think it might be somewhere around 24, 26.
Because
Yeah,
they're
it's-
all Wisconsin.
They're a mixture. They're a mixture. A lot of them are Illinois. You know, we're just across the border from you in northwest of Chicago. So it's a mixture of districts, but we will be updating this as well as we get, you know, all of our, we did this very early on to get a pulse on where things were, you know, early on. So we will be updating this as we get state data in and the rest of the spring data. And we haven't looked at high school at all yet because we still don't have, you know, the high school data is just starting to come in. So when we have it updated, we'll provide that as well to the district.
I'm sorry, this is Paula. I have one more question. I'm guessing I know the answer, but do you anticipate at any point being able to differentiate based on on-campus learning versus virtual learning?
Oh, yeah, we actually have that in this slide deck for you, for your district, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next slide for math. The same idea here, if there was no progress at all, that effect size would have been a negative 1.73. What we actually observed in ECRA's study was a negative 0.66, was the average observed effect size for math. 0 means there would have been no loss of learning, and you came in at a negative 0.08, very close to 0. So I think that's just incredible. It really is an incredible story that math, you know, which we've seen actually the reverse, we've seen greater loss in mathematics than in reading, and then it varies by grade level. But it does, what we noticed, again, and this is very qualitative because we don't have enough data yet. Not all districts were able to tag their students who were remote or hybrid or in person. They just didn't have a good way to do that, a clean list. But for those few that did, that gave us some, you know, indication of how students were learning that mode, we did see a pattern starting to take place that the growth was closer to 0 or not such a great loss, the more in-person students were. And I think we do have that on a next slide for you. This is looking at distance learners and on-campus learners. So varies by subject, but you can definitely see the on-campus learner, that row on the bottom is green across all subjects, indicating that, you know, they did better, especially in science and social studies. And you can see the difference in the math. It's a positive 0.17 for on-campus and a negative 1.2 for distance learning. The difference between those two numbers is a 0.29. So you're very, very close there to being a significant difference in math as well. So again, this supports what we are seeing qualitatively. A lot of the districts were not able to track that data for us. We're hoping now with the rest of spring data that we will also be able to update these numbers. Any questions? Yeah, then the last slide, I'm just going to sum up some of our observations that really stood out to us. That academic growth is consistent with your pre-pandemic rates despite COVID. Some student groups do have more unfinished learning than others, as we saw when we looked at that achievement gap and the growth gap by student groups. Your students perform well above the nation on NWEA MAP and above the state on Forward, with significant increases in the performance of your economically disadvantaged students. There is an increase in the number of students taking AP tests and passing the exams, with some of the highest numbers that you've seen in the last 5 years. ACT scores are consistently above state average. Your economically disadvantaged are performing at state average of all students. And at least in 2020, grade 11 ACT scores ranked the 5th highest in the state of Wisconsin. And then that's the sort of our conclusions. And I know that Matt has some plans for the district in terms of recovery for learning, you know, and he'll go into that. But let's stop and see if there's other questions or any other discussion points. I think there's some really good things here to celebrate. There's been a lot of great successes. It's not been easy for any school district across the nation, and we work with many districts across the nation. I can tell you that, as you've seen just from our preliminary studies, you're doing a lot better than many districts in terms of academic growth. And growth is really what you're after in terms of making sure that, you know, students are achieving to the best of their own potential and continuing to progress. And through accelerating growth is how we close these gaps and get more students to those grade level standards by growing them faster and accelerated rates. You know, Matt, any thoughts on your end or anything else that I didn't address or that you have questions on?
No, I think we covered it all. Just to, again, in your conclusions, to make sure that everybody's clear, what Gina's reporting on with regard to ACT scores are the results for 11th graders. Most often, the board is engaged in discussing ACT results related to the graduating class, which we are still waiting on. So the data is all important. Just when Gina lists that we're in the top 5, that is specific to 11th graders and not a way that we have generally reported ACT at the district level. But certainly good news. And then, as Gina noted, our next agenda item. So we'll finish with discussion and questions for Gina. But our next agenda item, Gina, is to review the draft academic recovery plan with the board here at the district level.
Great, okay. No other questions or thoughts?
I may have mispronounced your name. Will you pronounce it correctly for me? I'm
Yeah, you did. Semenek, those I's are silent.
Good.
It's just there to make it difficult.
I just
Semenek.
wanted to make sure it's kind of a thing of mine to make sure I'm pronouncing names correctly. So thank you for making sure I did it the right
Yeah.
way. So I did want to thank you so very much for your thorough and informative report to the board. It's wonderful to see that we've made some positive progress and to hear your positive accolades, and also point out the areas that we can look at for improvement are always good for us to be educated about. So thank you so very much for all of your time tonight.
You're welcome. It was great to see everybody from a distance, and stay well.
You as well. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
very
Gina.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. The next item on our agenda is presentation and discussion of the school district draft academic recovery plan. Dr. Joint will be joined by Dr. Jared Clark and other members of the district team for tonight's discussion of the plan. And we'll start with a presentation from Dr. Joint.
Great, thank you. And the full district director team is here. So when there is discussion, questions, I've invited them to be active if they have answers or the ability to provide you some additional information. I'll do the majority of the talking on the front end in presenting the recovery plan to you. And again, this
Excuse me,
is
Dr. Joint. I'm gonna go see if I can hear better down there.
okay.
Do you want to come here, Chris?
Can you hear, Chris?
Is that better?
Is that better for you?
Okay. So, one. Oh, okay. Great.
And you
We're
haven't
going
even
to
started
engage,
yet.
yeah, we're
You're
gonna-
already amazing.
we're going to engage the board on a couple plans tonight, both draft plans. This, the academic recovery plan, and our next agenda item, engage on the COVID-19 mitigation strategies for the upcoming school year. The district team has been hard at work putting together plans, both for the purpose of helping our community gain a better understanding of what this upcoming school year will look like and where we need to focus, but also as a means of engaging the board and community members in our planning, which will ultimately make federal funds, ESSER funding available to us as well. So wanting to make sure that we check in along the way as we do that planning, so that when we do get to a point that the board is approving plans, we're able to do so in a fashion that is congruent with the expectations for receiving ESSER funding. Our academic recovery plan is grounded and made in alignment with our 2021-2024 strategic plan goals and objectives. We have 5 goals there specifically with regard to an academic recovery plan. We've tied into goal 1, academic achievement and growth for each student. We've just had a presentation on student growth, which is useful in gaining some insight to our planning. Goal 2 is students' future success. And then goal 3, student belonging and well-being. Certainly our workforce environment and stakeholder relationships benefit from our work in goals 1, 2, and 3, but specifically as it relates to an academic recovery plan, we're tying into those 3 strategic plan goals. We're also, through our academic recovery plan, directed by our MTSD guiding principles. The board will remember that there are 8 approved, board approved guiding principles. The 5 that specifically get called out in this plan include that each student is valued, will learn, and will experience success, that education must address every facet of a child's being, that staff is our most valuable asset in achieving our mission and vision, that seeking innovation and working to constantly improve all practices increases the value of our organization for all stakeholders, and that research, assessment, and measurement must inform decision-making and accountability. So the following image in the presentation here is meant to help transition us from the presentation that we just had on academic growth and what we experienced based on having managed the pandemic to date. We know that the interruption in learning for that began in March of 2020 has affected outcomes, and included in that, not just academically, increased the need to support social and emotional well-being. And so as part of our 2021-2022 academic recovery plan, we're certainly looking to accelerate planning. And with that, we've developed a comprehensive and actionable plan that directly addresses unfinished learning experienced by our students. We have arranged the plan in alignment with the district milestones for post-secondary success. I just want to remind the board that these are the 7 milestones, are those measurable outcomes that allow us to monitor student progress in preparing for college and career success after high school. We named the milestones much like your those who have brought children into the doctor as they grow from babies into infants into small children. There are milestones when you go to those doctor appointments that you're checking in on, and the doctor is sharing information to say whether you are on track in achieving those milestones or not. And if you are not, that's an area to work on and focus as your child continues to grow and progress. So our goal is that when students graduate from high school, they have the knowledge and skills necessary to succeed in post-secondary education. We know that each milestone based on research is rigorous, encouraging our students to develop higher level thinking and problem solving skills. And I'll get into each of those. So the goal with this academic recovery plan, the overarching goal, is that by the end of this coming school year, the 2021-2022 school year, our students will meet or exceed the milestone percentages as attained in the 2018-19 school year. To put it simply, the first step in interrupting a downward trend or an upward trend, in this case, a downward trend, is to change the longitudinal path. So the measurable goal here is to at least meet or exceed those milestone percentages in the 18-19 school year. That gives us something to work toward and set our goals around. The image we have for you here on the next slide depicts how I'll be presenting and how the academic recovery plan is put together. We share the metric for monitoring progress. In most cases, this is a milestone with an exception around our failure data and graduation rate, which is a topic and something that needs attention with regard to emerging from the pandemic. The report includes some data review where we have provided the board highlights, and I'll highlight also some of the opportunities as it relates to the data in order to improve. And then with that, the stated recovery goal. For each goal, we have strategies for recovery, and as we move from draft into a formalized recovery plan, we'll have current budget allocations that includes both new and current funding. So we're looking at financial and other resources in order to determine that current budget allocation, as well as the measurable outcomes that we'll use to determine whether we had an effect or we didn't with this plan, and be able to use those to provide a summary of results and ultimately a return on investment for the work that went into the strategies to recover. So first, I want to note that there are some overarching strategies here that are not tied to a specific milestone 1, 2, 3, or 4, but that in our approach to the 21-22 school year, we're accounting for, and we expect to have influence in a positive way across the outcomes that we measure, across milestones. So one of those is to reinstitute pre-pandemic bell schedules to ensure teacher collaboration time within the workday focused on proactive data review and planning to differentiate instruction and inform individualized student support. So you do see throughout this plan in a couple different places call out for informing individualized student support or differentiating instruction. In our last presentation, Dr. Semenek noted we have the ability to drill down into our data down to individual student and determine who are those students at what grade levels that in the report that we just had are not growing at expected rates or have not yet attained a benchmark or a milestone, as was just described. And that will be used to differentiate instruction and inform individualized student report. We provided in the plan that was shared a definition for differentiate instruction, wanting to make sure that everybody is functioning from the same space. We define differentiating instruction as tailoring instruction to fit a specific student's individual needs. That can be done by the classroom teacher. In some cases, that might be done in conjunction or in partnership with a specialist that we have working with the teacher and with students, or might be done entirely by a specialist in the form of intervention when we talk about differentiating and meeting individual needs. So I just wanted to note that on the front end with the first bullet point here. The second strategy that will be implemented in the 21-22 school year is to reintegrate instructional specialists into leadership roles to grow and coach teachers to support that differentiated instruction, which I just defined for you. So I want to just pause with these first 2 bullet points and note this is something we discussed through last year. One of the challenges, and we discussed it as we navigated the school year in scenario B, where we had minimized the number of student contacts, that in doing so and in providing our families with the option of both in-person and distance learning, our FTE was spread and more attached to course. So many of our specialists were actually teaching classrooms as opposed to functioning like they have in past years in that specialist role, where they're working with teachers, both to train and develop them, but also working with teachers and their students to co-teach and or provide specific intervention. That was something that we weren't able to take advantage of in managing last school year the way that we had to in order to make both in-person and distance learning available in a way that was safe for our students and staff. The third bullet point here is integrate a reading focus in conjunction with social studies instruction. So recognizing that in recovering and improving student growth, specifically as it relates to reading, that we have opportunities to take advantage of teaching reading in other subject areas as well. Our students do a lot of reading in social studies. Here's the example. And that we'll integrate that reading focus in growing students' ability to progress as readers with our social studies instruction. Included in this list of general strategies for student success that will be part of the upcoming school year. On the next slide here, we have increased professional development opportunities for teachers outside of instructional hours to maximize time in the classroom. So our teachers do a fantastic job of continuing to grow and learn as professionals. We're going to do everything we can to maximize the time that they have in their classroom with their students in that work. And so offering professional development training in ways that it can be accessed without having to get a building substitute. So we know that there will be benefit from that. Another strategy is to improve the process for developing personalized support for students who have demonstrated additional learning and behavioral needs. Again, to go back to last school year, with the minimizing student contacts, our teachers had less time available and less opportunities to meet as collaborative teams to review data and determine needs. And so improving processes in order to develop and personalize that support for students. And then to provide additional opportunities for students to engage in experiences and transition activities to build their connection and sense of belonging to their school community. Whether students were in person and felt like bell schedules were constricted in ways that they weren't able to make as much social contact as they would have, or whether they were distance learning and are transitioning into the in-person setting this year, we fully understand the need to support those transitions with activities and working back to building connections to the school and that sense of belonging within the community. That's work that we know we have to set out and do. So again, those are 6 strategies that aren't tied to a specific milestone, but that we know with this upcoming school year, we need the opportunity to take advantage of. And as we implement plans for what the school year will look like, those are strategies that need to be in place for us to recover from the pandemic. So now what I'll do is I'll dig into strategies specific to some of the milestones. And so where we saw some of the data related to student growth in our last presentation, you'll note in some of these strategies calling out specific components of the curriculum or skills that need to be further built for an entire cohort or content area, or you'll see a grade level that's being called specifically for additional support as examples. This is where I'll share with you some of the strategies specific to milestones for recovery. And we'll start with milestone 1. So on the slide in front of you, you have the longitudinal data associated with milestone 1. I want to note that and describe the milestone a little bit. Children who read proficiently by 3rd grade are more likely to experience success through and beyond high school. The district monitors student progress in reading with the goal of ensuring students are reading at grade level by the start of 3rd grade. Each year, the school district documents progress toward this goal by reporting on the percentage of students reading to independent level enrolled in kindergarten through grade 2. Independent level is the ability at which the student can read without additional support, as measured in our district by the Fontes and Pennell text level gradient assessment. I do want to provide additional context to each of these milestones where I can. In 2019, the percentage of 4th grade public school students performing at or above the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP proficient level, which would be in alignment with our definition of reading at the independent level, at grade level, was 34% nationally. So while we certainly are concerned and working to change the longitudinal, excuse me, the longitudinal path, it is worth noting that we set these milestones at very high rates. We have high expectations, set rigorous milestones. And I mentioned for you before in our setting milestones, we're working to not ensure, but guarantee that students experience success after high school in a post-secondary setting, whether that be college or career. So some of the opportunities to improve that I wanted to highlight here as we look at this data and dig into it. In 2019, 2020, the kindergarten scores were the lowest of the grade level cohorts at 76% of students at the benchmark. This last school year, 2021, that same cohort, so as 1st graders, was the lower achieving cohort at 73%. So if you think about that, our kindergarten students experienced the 2019-2020 year, that year where all schools in the state of Wisconsin closed in March, and then their 1st grade year in a year where we were managing the pandemic in two different learning styles, both in person and distance learning. So as they turn into second graders, that is absolutely a cohort that we want to pay close attention to and ensure that some of our resources are assigned in order to get that reading level up by the end of second grade. I'll also note there was a decline of 15% for the percentage of first graders who met the benchmark in the 2021 school year when compared to the first graders in the 18-19 school year. So again, that cohort is one that we need to pay some attention to. And you'll see that here. We have 3 strategies for recovery. The goal here is that by the end of the 21-22 school year, at least 90% of students will have achieved milestone 1. The 3 strategies that we're recommending here in the draft to put in place is 1, to implement a summer academic boost program for all grades, kindergarten through 5 students who did not grow academically at the rate they had pre-pandemic, using that Fontes and Pennell and the spring 2020 NWA MAP scores. You'll note that this is a summer academic boost program that was already in place. The board approved that as part of its new initiatives in its budget work in the spring. The second strategy was also approved as a new initiative, and that was to add a student support coordinator. The coordinator, not an administrator role, a specialist role that will be assigned to work both with teachers and directly with students. That position, the person in that position will be assigned to work with students and teachers to ensure academic growth and recovery in grades kindergarten through grade 2. And that will include a priority focus on grade 2, reading to grade level proficiency. And I just mentioned why. And then strategy 3 is to dedicate a district-wide professional mentor to first and second grade teachers in grades 4-year-old kindergarten through grade 2 to support student learning outcomes. The long-standing practice in this district has been to assign more of what would be considered a buddy mentor, a teacher that might be in the same grade level or at least in the same building to work with a newly assigned teacher. And many of our new teachers each have their own unique mentor in that scenario. What we've done here is taken one of our teachers and made them the district-wide professional mentor with this assignment in order to support all teachers, not just teachers new to the district this year, but also teachers that were new to the district last year in serving as that professional mentor, helping onboard and support their work. And by looking at, by assigning a professional mentor in that manner, having part of the day to actually get in those classrooms and work with teachers and thereby have a closer connection to the work with kids as well.
Do you want questions now or at the
Well, I was
end?
just going to ask you the same thing. Would you like me to stop after each milestone or would you like me to plow through to the end?
No, I think we should stop. That'd be my vote.
So do you have data that shows that the first and second year teachers, you know, do you have a baseline data for the first and second year teachers for this?
So we have assessed student growth results, whether it be by ECRA or we also have student growth results from NWA MAP. And yes, this is an area that we need to provide some additional support. Our student growth results would show that our students grow at higher rates with those teachers that have been working in the district for a longer period of time.
This is such a critical 2-year period. As you pointed out, these students who were kindergartners 2 years ago, 2/3 or 3/4 of their education has been under pandemic conditions. Many of them may not have even been in school. They could have been virtual. We don't know. I mean, we do know, but not here. My question would be, it's great. We've added apparently more resource in a full-time teacher or sport person. We've added another dedicated mentor. I don't know if this person will actually teach or just be a mentor. From an execution perspective, are we changing? Because we're trying to put more curriculum in many cases in front of, and more instruction time in front of some of these younger students. How are we accomplishing that? If, and maybe you don't know the answer, I'll just throw it out there. How are we accomplishing that within the time frame of a school year? Because we have two enemies, right? One is time. Time, once it's gone, it's gone. And the second is getting smaller groups with more individualized instruction, which I think you pointed out in an earlier meeting, and so rightly so. So for this critical group, how are we, can you comment on how we're accomplishing that? If you're not able to, you haven't gotten that far, that's fine.
Sure. Well, I would say one of the things that we've done, especially over the last 2 years, is prioritizing the standards, prioritizing the learning that we know our students really need to get. To your point, there is just a limited amount of time.
Right.
And so we are not in a stage where you can go back and remediate, and it's like, okay, they missed all this, so we got to put in all that time. And so one of the things that we use in the term that is used, and Dr. Joint used it earlier, is the accelerated learning. And essentially the idea behind accelerated learning is before you go to the next section, you identify what are the things that the student really need to have down solid. What are those things they need to have support? And you provide that. And again, in the business world, maybe you would have called it just in time, but you provide that right there, and then you go on. And so to answer your question too, is we are not necessarily looking at implementing the same curriculum we did in the 2018, 2019, right? There's still just so many hours.
Right.
And so really being able to hone down and prioritize what our kids most need and really building from there.
So if I'm understanding that answer, what you're saying is we're going to take the curriculum of pre-pandemic and we're going to remediate it to some extent to focus more on the essentials and maybe less on, I'll call it
Yeah.
fluff, in order to get more content and more instruction in key areas during that period of time. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's good.
Do you have any sense for, for the academic boost? We got about 70% of the kids that were, invited to enroll. Why the other 30 didn't?
Some of them, I would say the majority of them, it's summer. There's opportunities in the class, there's opportunities for the family to go on vacation and different things like that. We actually had more students enrolled at the beginning of the summer, and they've kind of dropped off as when we got more into July and different activities. That's been the primary reason, is it just didn't fit necessarily into their summer.
I would note that's not an MTSD specific challenge. Alan Porsick, who does a column every weekend for the Journal Sentinel, wrote about just that in the entire Milwaukee area, and I assume you could apply it elsewhere. But Dr. Clark has already engaged the district director team to talk about the fact that we dedicated some funds to the summer academic boost program that will not be needed based on what was just described. Do we have the ability to take that idea of tutoring during the summer and apply it then during the school year, since we have funding dedicated to tutoring? How do we take that idea of what would have happened over the summer and provide it then during the school year? So no decision or anything to report on that, but certainly recognizing the fact that the core idea behind providing some additional tutoring to those students that need it as part of summer academic boost does not have to be constricted to only looking at summer.
Okay, thanks.
And recognizing that the pandemic probably has changed a lot of things that happened pre-pandemic, tutoring opportunities and even just parent tutoring opportunities. Is that something that we might be able to look at? I mean, we may not be able to make the decision right now, but just trying to work with staff to support them. If a student has a study hall, it's something that I know I was involved with and others were, elementary, middle school, supporting staff in that manner. Other ways to just do anything we can to support the learning that has been lost across the country.
Right, and I think there's a TBD attached to that. And so
Right.
part of the challenges with anything related to volunteers in the building was managing the pandemic
course.
last year. So
Of
we had
course.
some pretty strict guidelines associated with getting additional people in and out of the building. And so as we evolve into figuring out what next year looks like and what those kind of policies are, then yes, you have
Right.
more access to more people.
Absolutely.
Kind of on that same, oh, go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say, to piggyback back to the academic boost, for those that did participate, is there any anecdotal insight as to how effective it was, or?
Yeah, not at this point. We're actually just halfway through because the focus was in July and August. We know who those students are, and that's who we'll be looking at where they scored in spring and where they score in the fall, and really be able to see if hopefully we see improvement in there. So at this point, no, but we will come the end of September.
Thank you.
Sort of along the same note of Wendy speaking about the parents. As we go forward, and maybe this is an overarching comment to all grades and not just kindergarten, first and second, as we're talking about here. Will there be some communication to parents to act with maybe a greater sense of urgency than they have in the past in helping their student, their child, especially one that might be behind, work more with the district to get the facilities, the tutoring, the teaching, and the different academic initiatives that need to happen at home. I mean, the district can only do so much. We can't work miracles. It has to be, you can bring a horse to water kind of thing. I'm just wondering if there is going to be, and maybe it's not for first and second, but for the entire group, is there going to be some outreach to parents to say, this is the year you really need to pay attention a little more than you have in the past? Something along that lines. I don't know if you've thought about that or.
I'm writing it down.
And even just looking at the curriculum overarching, I know we have a 7-year review cycle. Is it logical at this point in our time frame to really engage our staff in analyzing, is the current curriculum meeting the needs based on where our students are? I'm talking K-12.
So we do that every year at different subject areas and go through that. So that's not a pandemic. That's just a natural process that we go through. And when we identify changes, we make those changes and continue on. And so we don't necessarily, in the 7-year cycle, we don't necessarily buy new resources every time
Right.
it comes through, but we do evaluate whether or not we need to make some changes. And many times it's just internal curricular changes that we would need to do. But yep, we do that on a yearly, annual basis, more often in math and reading, because those are the ones that we really take a look at.
Especially even now, just looking at the middle school curriculum and the math numbers and knowing that we went to that 2-tier system, do we actually have what we need to support the students in their growth? And look at that curriculum, look at Eureka Math, look at Springboard.
I think what Gina shared earlier is a prime example that what we're doing is working really well. I mean, the fact that we were almost at 0 during a pandemic, and that was grades 2 through 8, which includes the middle school, shows that, again, we can always improve and we always look to improve, but from a resource standpoint, we're actually doing okay.
I'm going to move on to milestone 2. Not that we can't go back to milestone 1, but we were starting to get into milestone 3 there. So I'm going to keep us moving here. Measure of academic Measure of academic progress growth tests are administered to all district students in grades 1 through 8 in the fall, winter, and spring. These tests not only determine students' instructional level, but also measure their academic growth throughout the school year and from year to year in reading and mathematics. In our school district, progress is reported annually for students in grades 3 through 8 who score at or above the 66th percentile at grade level on math tests demonstrating reading skills that will likely lead to post-secondary success. The 66th percentile was chosen to measure achievement for milestone 2 based on findings reported in the NWEA MAP College Readiness Benchmark Study. That study found that middle school students are likely to be college ready if they perform between the 66th and 75th percentiles in reading. The estimated MAP benchmarks are anchored on the ACT score of 24 for both reading and mathematics. As is reflected in the data here in this chart, over 60% of students in the district in grades 3 through 8 are consistently performing in the top third of all students in the nation that are administered the NWEA MAP assessment. So, opportunities to improve as we reviewed the data. And what you have here, I won't read all 5 to you, but you have the percent decline for students by grade level cohort, grades 4 through 8. That percent decline fits somewhere within a range of 8.3% per grade level up to 12.5% decline. So about 1 out of every 10 students in grades 4 through 8 declined below that benchmark level with the last round of NWEA MAP assessments. Make sense? So then, Amanda, I think I actually handled both slides 14 and 15 there at once. Slide 16, the recovery goal is by the end of the 21-22 school year, at least 66% of students will have achieved milestone 2. Again, that's the percentage that would be synonymous with the 18-19 results. And so here we have strategies 4 and 5. We're continuing up in numerical order. The first one, to increase teacher capacity in grades 3 through 8 through professional learning and coaching, led by our literacy specialists. So again, they both train and develop teachers as well as work with teachers and individual students to differentiate instruction in teaching. And when we looked at the results, the focus here from a curriculum instruction standpoint needs to be additionally on key ideas and details and on craft and structure in English language arts classes. So those are the 2 areas that we're seeing a greatest area of need when we assess the results of those assessments. And then the second strategy is to improve the use of and access to technology-based literacy interventions. I do want to note this doesn't mean we're just assigning students to a computer in order to access that intervention, but that we have increased the amount of technology-based literacy interventions that are facilitated as part of the instruction provided to students. The beauty of that being that most of those technology-based literacy interventions are providing immediate information to say whether or not students are making growth or where they're hung up in order to provide additional support. And that would be to support the individual needs of students in grades 3 through 8 as determined through the student review team process. And there's another term that I just want to take an opportunity to define for you. The student review team is a dedicated group of school-based instructional and student support staff members that work together to analyze individual student outcomes and, when determined necessary, design a personalized plan for support and intervention based on students' strengths, existing knowledge and skills, and instructional and or behavioral goals. And I think, Mr. Hopkins, there's the opportunity that you were mentioning before. If we're designing a personalized plan for a student that requires additional support and intervention, the opportunity to connect and communicate with families about what you mentioned before exists and can be managed right there.
Yeah, you can never have enough of that. And I like the fact that we're going to look at individual students, because while we look at these cumulative numbers, in the end of the day, what I really want to get down to is how many students do we need to address? And I think I like the fact that this plan goes right to an individual level. I think you define a problem, you build a plan, and then the hardest part of the whole game is the execution. And we'll talk about that at a later date, but at least we've got a framework here to really do something meaningful. And I'm glad to see it.
I'm not gonna, we can take time for milestone 2. Do you mind if I just present milestone 3 at the same time? It's the same assessment. We're just changing the content area, and you'll see some similar strategies. So then we can take some opportunities for questions and comments there. If we look at milestone 3, instead of reading achievement per the NWA MAP assessment, this is mathematics achievement in the same grade levels 3 through 8. And I'll just note that here we measure the percentage of students who score at or above the 70th percentile at grade level on those MAP tests, demonstrating mathematics skills that will likely lead to college success. And I'll note the 70th percentile was chosen to measure achievement for the same reason, that same NWA MAP college readiness benchmark study. That means, as is reflected in the chart below, over half of students in our district in grades 3 through 8 are consistently performing in the top 30% of all students in the nation with regard to their achievement in math. And so here, when we looked at this data, we noted opportunities to improve. Last school year, 7th grade students had the lowest percentage who met milestone 3 at 47%. Those will be our 8th graders next year. And that the percentage of students who met the milestone decreased by a little less than 4% in grade 5 when comparing the 2018-19 to 2021 school years. The third point here being the percentage of students who met the milestone decreased by nearly 20% in grade 7 when comparing 18-19 to the 2021 school years. And so our strategies now, I said paralleled in some ways those of milestone 3. Here in strategy 6, we're looking at increasing teacher capacity, providing additional support in the form of training and co-teaching in grades 3 through 5 through professional learning and coaching led by math specialists to differentiate instruction And the areas here are in operations and algebraic thinking, number and operations, dash fractions. So this is the way the assessment provides feedback. I don't speak in dashes, but that's and then the third area, and in measurement. So those are the three areas that are determined from a skills standpoint, the greatest areas of need for us to get in and provide some acceleration and additional support. And then similar to what you read with strategy 5 in reading, strategy 7 is to improve the use of and access to technology-based mathematics interventions to support that instruction and the individual needs of students in grades 3 through 8 as determined through, again, the student review team process. So I just wanted to hit on milestone 3 at the same time as I did milestone 2, because you can see the parallel language and work and strategies across those 2 milestones. I'll pause there.
You mentioned you're bringing in more instructors. Did I catch that right? In this 3rd through 8th grade?
Yes, so it goes back to that overarching strategy to say last year in the bell schedules that we created and having to staff for both in-person and distance learning, many of, if not all of our specialists were assigned to actually teach classes as to provide that in-class support, whether it's in a co-serving kind of way where you're working with a teacher in the classroom with students or providing individualized intervention outside of the classroom. And so when I talk about increasing the number of individuals associated with working with our students, we gain that by moving into that pre-pandemic bell schedule where teacher collaboration and the ability to work additional staff members into classrooms becomes available again.
So we're not really actually hiring more resources. We're just using the resources that were limited last year due to the virtual learning situation back to their duties. Is that essentially the?
Yes, I'd say we stretched our FTE more and in different ways in order to handle the additional sections that had to be run to, one, keep class sizes low enough that we were able to implement physical distancing, but also to provide the option of on-campus and distance learning. That came with the need to increase FTE and how we assign them, which we did for the most part without adding FTE in ways last year. But it just meant that we couldn't do some of the co-serving and collaboration work that we've done in the past.
Particularly at the middle school, which probably had the most difficult scheduling. We talked about this a while back. Do you feel, and maybe again, this is premature, but do you feel we have enough resources, particularly in the middle school, to accommodate acceleration in learning, even with bringing back our specialists into the classroom a la 2018, 2019? Or is it too early to make that call because we haven't got granular enough?
Yeah, I guess I would say it's probably too early to make that call. Although I would say just the way our 8th grade math is laid out from an algebra standpoint. So again, this is one of the points I like to make. In high school, if you were to take algebra 1, you have to do it in 2 trimesters. At the middle school, we get 3 trimesters. So we've already naturally built in an extra trimester of math to help ensure we can support students where they need it the most. And so that's where I see us being able to make some of that acceleration, especially in 8th grade. 6th and 7th grade, those curriculums are the same as they had been. And so that's more of really identifying what are our kids missing, what was unfinished there, and really honing it in.
I just noticed that the 9th grade, which would have been their first year in high school, was a particularly hard hit group in the mathematics, which I'm assuming is a fallout from 8th, That's my question.
Yep.
That was the genesis of my question.
Gotcha.
Because the last thing you want to do right now is not go deep enough with
Correct.
the resourcing. If a 3-inch screw will do it, let's use a 4-inch one and make sure of it if we can. So to make an analogy.
That was kind of going to be my thought too, is I just looking at the need and the breadth of the work of our math and reading specialists, and those being such important benchmarks, even just looking at Gina's presentation, 8th grade, that's a vulnerable time frame when you're leaping in. So I've always wondered if we really have enough specialists to serve the needs of all of our students, or if that's an area, you don't even have to answer it, that we might want to look at. Because right now, especially if they're doing professional coaching and also trying to do one-on-one in the classroom. They serve such an important role, it seems to me.
In that same vein of what Andy and Wendy just said, so I'm guessing the student review team is going to have a much heavier student load to really drill down and help accommodate, you know, the we're not calling it learning loss, what are we calling it?
Unfinished learning.
Yes.
Unfinished.
So I'm guessing they're going to have a much greater workload than they've ever had before. And again, back to capacity and manpower, ensuring that that exists.
So I'm hedging because we spent the whole day working with our administrators today, and a significant portion of that time was on our co-planning, co-serve to co-learn teams, and
Right.
how we are reframing those, refocusing the work that they will be doing with our students and for our students in terms of the differentiating and really being able to meet the needs of each student when a lesson is initially delivered. And not to say that we haven't been doing that in the past, but there's a definite refocus on that and some different strategies we'll be using. So recognizing that the way we're be able to meet the needs of our students is in that whole classroom, right? And being able to really address it there. And so our hope is that we don't end up with more going to the SRT teams, and that those students that we do look at in an SRT team, we're going to be able to quickly diagnose what the students need and immediately get that to them. So one of the things that we're really looking at is how to, I don't want to necessarily use the term fast track, maybe streamline the supports we provide for students so that students are getting it as quickly as we possibly can get it to them. And I know that wasn't a complete answer, but it's the best one right now before we get into the school year.
It's a fair question. 3 of you have asked it. Do we need additional support in our middle schools? Okay.
I do want to tie one thing in that Andy said before, just back into this about the kind of individualized and back at the home kind of opportunities. Is there or might there be an opportunity, as you noted in a couple of the strategies for learning for technology, to carry that back into the home? Because I know there are some resources. I know, for an example, an extracurricular that one of my children uses, their coach can track some of that opportunity technology of what they're doing, how they're progressing, you know, if they're practicing using it. So to kind of that same point, if there's an opportunity to extend that, you know, so it's not confined to just the classroom in a sense, or those specialty opportunities, that there might be opportunity to extend that to those who want it. You know, if their son or daughter wants to be able to have the opportunity to do that at home, here's a program, or here's this way to still stay connected that the teacher can still maybe more indirectly or passively kind of observe. To stay connected. If that's there, I don't know if there is an opportunity that's been discussed, but maybe something for consideration.
I mean, we do have that in math. We use Zern for math, which is kindergarten through 5th grade. Certainly opportunity, every one of our kids has that opportunity to carry on that work outside. But we have discussed that. That's one, and that's part of one of the reasons why the goal in here, well, it's not as explicit as that, but taking a look at some of those instructional tools that we can use. Again, with being cognizant of the fact that, and I believe a couple board members asked that earlier, we're not just putting kids on a computer and saying, okay, good.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
Alex, which is a math program, that'll take care of you. No, we still want to make sure that we're having the human touch to it. But to your point, when we know that we can support, and we know we have many families that, you know, they definitely jump at the chance to help ensure their kids are following and working on things at home. So yep, definitely something we will be looking at and communicating as we go forward.
I would add, just to clarify too, to have it a concerted effort versus I'm gonna do the white pages check and try to find wherever I can find some app. Versus here's a validated source that aligns with the things that you're already doing in the classroom or within the district. And I guess I was more specifically to the middle school because I'm familiar with Zern a little bit.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Kind of that, so that was the focus kind of to that group a little bit more.
So does that mean Chromebooks will be going to home with students as need be?
We're maintaining the one-to-one initiative that is in place. All of our students will have access to that Chromebook in at least grades 3 on up.
That's great.
Okay. Milestone 4, students in our district are administered an ACT-related assessment, like every public school district in the state of Wisconsin annually as part of the state's testing program. The ACT series of assessments can be used to assess college readiness. Students who meet or exceed the ACT benchmarks in English, reading, math, and science associated with this exam have a high probability for success in respective college credit-bearing courses. Based on 2020 results, ACT reported that nationally, 26% of ACT tested students met all 4 ACT college readiness benchmarks, which is what UC tracked here with this data. For us, the percentage here is those students tracking in grades 9 through 11. These numbers did change a little bit this year on the web page. We were also administering an ACT test in grade 8 in 2015-16 through 2018-19. We removed the grade 8 results so that we had a consistent measure here longitudinally of students in grades 9 through 11. So just wanted to be upfront with the board in terms of if you're seeing a number change here, we took out the 8th grade results from past years so that we were as close to apples as we could be, yet there are still a few asterisks here, including one from the 1920 school year where students in grades 9 and 10 were unable to take that state assessment due to the closure. So ACT college readiness benchmarks are really important, and that's shown in the fact that we track it as one of our milestones. It is also a pretty unique value in the nation. I'll give an example just to note. You could not meet an ACT benchmark in the content area associated with science and still be ranked around the 89th, 90th percentile in the nation as it relates to your science results. So just to give you something to scratch your head about back at home, you could not meet the college readiness benchmark in science and still rank in the top 15% of test takers for science in the nation.
Matt, do we still offer the ACT to 8th graders?
We do not.
8th graders can still take it though. Their
8th
families
graders can still take it voluntarily. We don't offer it to all 8th graders. We just were not able to use the results in ways that informed instruction, and it was yet a 3rd assessment then that 8th graders were taking in the spring.
And I just want to make clear, so we've never offered the ACT to 8th graders. That has always been an extra test that
Right.
parents could sign up for.
Just
It was the ACT Aspire we used to use. And those are 2 different assessments, although they eventually grow into the ACT.
So was it the SAT that was offered in 7th grade as an option and the ACT in 8th? Years ago, it was just voluntary,
Got it.
but yeah, I thought it was, I didn't think we still offered those. Okay. Those options.
So we will note here in our opportunities to improve, having reviewed that data, that on the spring 2021 forward exam, about 44% of 8th grade students scored basic or below basic in the English language arts assessment. On the spring 2021 ACT and ACT Aspire assessments, 52% of students did not meet the math benchmark and 51% of students did not meet the science benchmark. So with regard to that 8th grade cohort on the forward exam, now 9th graders, they won't take the MAP assessment anymore. So we're transitioning that strategy here into milestone 4, because that's the assessment that our 9th graders would take. And so the first strategy shared for milestone 4, which would be strategy 8, is increase teacher capacity in grade 9 through professional learning and coaching support by the literacy specialist to differentiate instruction and teaching. And here we pulled from the 8th grade cohort's 8th grade assessment, key ideas and details, craft and structure, and integration of knowledge and ideas. So recognizing that those were gaps or opportunities, greatest areas of needs in 8th grade, we can't have them start high school and ignore that fact. We'll have to account for that in their 9th grade instruction. And then strategy 9 is to build students' ability to persevere in solving rigorous contextual mathematical problems by providing real world exemplar application problems in high school math coursework. So as we reviewed the results of the 9th and 10th grade ACT test takers. This is an area that should improve those math scores. And strategy 10, to increase students' exposure to rigorous science experiences, to include a focus on, and these are areas that show up in the assessment, data interpretation, scientific investigation, and evaluation of models, inferences, and experimental results in high school science coursework.
So I'll just jump in here real quick before somebody asks a question is, when we took a look at math and science, one of the things when we first dug in, some of the questions are, okay, are kids not getting as strong of an algebra background in middle school? Are we not covering geometry? Well, again, when we look at the overall results from the ACT and ACT Aspire, our kids actually were scoring really well in algebra. They were scoring really well in geometry. Again, we can always improve, but it was the area of application and those real world type problems that's where many of our students were faltering. And so that's why it doesn't say we're going to really focus on algebra. We're going to really focus on geometry. No, it's more of the real world exemplar problems. And same with science. It wasn't necessarily some of those scientific concepts. It was the application of the concepts that our kids need continued support and experiences in. So that's really where we'll be honing in and focusing on.
Okay, I'm going to transition us into.
Can I ask a
Go ahead,
question real
Paul.
quickly? So I know that overarching, the goal for all of these is to meet what we achieved in 18-19. However, with
At
this,
least,
I'm sorry,
at least what we achieved in 18.
right, at least. So if we find that 2021 exceeds 44%, might we want to make a modification to this goal in particular, have it be an outlier, if you will, where we elevate that goal and not have it go backwards?
We can absolutely come back to that if that's the case, yes. I understand.
Thank you.
So milestones 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all achievement-oriented milestones and fit within strategic plan goal 1 or under that umbrella. Strategic plan goal 2 is about students' future success, and there has been much press nationally, and certainly we've discussed graduation rate or an increase in failure grades that have been experienced as we've managed the pandemic. So graduation rate is something that we've included in the pandemic plan here, the percentage of students on track to graduate. I just want to note that graduation rate indicates those percentage of 12th grade students who graduate from high school within 4 years. Completing high school successfully has a major impact on an individual's life. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, students that earn a high school diploma ultimately earn over $670 more per week than those that do not. The metric we're using here to measure the graduation rate is the 4-year cohort graduation rate. So we do have students each year through special education services that might finish in 5, 6. We have an 18 to 21-year-old program, but we're using the 4-year cohort graduation rate as reported on the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction school report card for Homestead High School, and that's the longitudinal data that you see in front of you. So I will note, in order to graduate, you must attain credits. Graduation is based on attaining the right number of credits in alignment with state statute and board policy around what's required of Homestead High School students. So included here, the recovery goal and action plan would be that the 4-year cohort graduation rate for the 21-22 class will be at least 97.5%. We have 2 strategies. Strategy 11, provide a pathway for credit recovery within Homestead High School to accelerate credit attainment for students as determined through the student review team process. This is a topic that the board engaged in as part of a new initiative that it approved with the budget making process in spring. Not that we haven't had a credit attainment option for students, but we've had to outsource that. Students have had to attain those credits off campus. moving that option onto campus provides some more flexibility and opportunities for our students in that case. Strategy 12 then is for each student that appears on a 20 or 40-day progress report, DRF list by trimester, the Homestead Learning Support Team will develop and implement a grade improvement plan that includes the assignment of peer tutoring, study center case management, and our content-specific study center help sessions. So 3 options there. Not the progress reports that all of us might remember would have gone out when we navigated high school, meaning it was a letter home to say, hey, so-and-so, you're failing. Do something about it. So this is our student support team at the high school engaging in creating plans that include the options of or a combination of peer tutoring, study center case management, and our content-specific study center help sessions.
Matt, right, can you talk to me a little bit about the study center and exactly how that supports kids?
The Academic Success Center.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have
Minutes.
we have a couple individuals, adults, teachers that are assigned there. And their job is to take a look at and support students that need our help. Whether it's through reteaching, whether it's through just helping complete projects and things like that, we do that. Part of what they do is they also work with other high school students to create peer tutoring opportunities, just to really ensure the kids are on track and doing what they need to do to be successful and attain those credits.
I think that's great for building confidence within students and let them shine. And I'm hoping also extra opportunities, face-to-face time with their teachers, but I wasn't quite sure if the study center was the academic learning center, so that it's the same. Okay, but I like the empowerment of peer mentoring. I think that's a great idea. Hopefully builds engagement.
How will we execute a 20-day progress report? Because I think it's really a super goal. In the past, urgency wasn't maybe always the first thought when we came to failing grades, failing students. And I remember from our conversations about this, it seems to me like this year we're going to have a multiple of the 5 students we had last year that are in jeopardy of graduating within their senior year.
Mhm.
So just putting a time frame to that, they only have 1 year to accomplish maybe more than a year's worth of credits. So I remember it's like 24 credits to graduate.
Yep.
And you can take a maximum of 36, 32, something like
30.
that. 30.
In your career, you can get, if you took a class, every trimester, you could get 30 credits in your high school career.
So at some point that reaches a point of no return, you've got too little time and too many credits to make up. And I think it's important to identify those, particularly who aren't seniors, but who are even in 10th and 11th grade before they receive a failing grade. So back to my original question, how are we going to execute a 20-day progress report, which I think would be great if we could do it.
Yeah.
Kind of bad news early, right?
Yeah. So we do that. And it's something where through Infinite Campus, teachers put in their grades. The high school principal sends out a statement, the counseling department sends out a statement saying, make sure your grades are updated, give them a few days before the 20-day, and they just run a report. And that's where our student learning center, the learning support team, the counselors all get that list. And then that's what they're expected to act upon. We do the same thing on the 40-day list too. And again, with the idea that we want to clean those up so there aren't very many Ds and Fs once it comes to the end of the trimester.
And describe the execution after I have the list. I'm that guy and I get a list. What do I do?
Yep.
What
So
happens?
no, that's good. And that's where it's a combination of the students support team and the guidance counselors in terms of trying to identify first what seems to be the issue. Is it attendance? Is it engagement? Is it, an academic standpoint? And then again, we actually have created new forms for them to jot down or to create a plan along with the student. So they would call the student in, sit down and discuss what that is and be able to be on the right track there. So again, when we look at some of our data, you may see, okay, there's 150 Fs or something like that. Generally speaking, that doesn't mean there's 150 students. So there's still a lot of students that we'll need to work with, but it is a number, it is a goal for the support team that they feel as though they can they can accomplish it and it's something that's doable. They know it's going to be hard work and they're going to have to spend a lot of time on it. But it is something that's important for us to do.
Are the parents engaged, or at what point are the parents engaged in that scenario?
Yeah, so in all of the things that we would do, it starts with the classroom teacher. Classroom teachers are expected to be in contact with families whenever there's a D or an F, whenever a student is struggling. And then it rolls then into the counselors and into the support team to be able to connect with and work with the families too, and keep the parents abreast of what's going on, get additional ideas of what may work with the student, and again, help ensure that everybody knows what needs to be achieved for the student to be successful in the class.
So, go ahead. Yep.
The only time parents don't have access to Infinite Campus is right at the end of each trimester where the grades get finalized, and there's usually 3, 4, 5 days where it's closed, but otherwise parents always have access to be able to go in and look at it.
The reason I bring this up, Chris, is there is an inordinate number of Fs this last year. Some of it was understandably the virtual learner is not engaging, and it wasn't, something we normally perceive or would get. But my question was, where were the parents during, your kids failing half his classes? And I just wanted to understand what that progression was to get a hold of that parent, engage them. Because as I said earlier, without the parents, it's a team effort. It's us, it's the teachers, of course, like yourself, and parents. And it worried me that we had so many Fs, and I thought, where are the parents if my child is receiving multiple failing grades? And I was surprised to find out, very surprised, that in our district, we had some parents that I don't think reacted as quickly as I would like to have seen. So a lot of my conversation here is, I want as best a mechanism as we can have to get in contact with them. I understand, in talking to Dr. Joint and Jared earlier, that we actually at one point had a team of teachers that went literally to the door, right?
At the high school.
And I applaud that. It's a shame that we have to go that far, but as a district, I don't know what more you can do, right? Other than knock on somebody's door, quite literally. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that was a great effort on our part, but that's why I was asking these questions. Because this year, it's not going to be like any other. It's an all hands on deck, right? And it's got to include the teachers, us, and the parents. So I think the earlier we get to the parents through 20 and 40-day progress reports, through a phone call, the better. Because having that all grouped together, I think will ensure success versus maybe just us and the student, perhaps. I'm not an educator by trade, but you were. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, they're probably a little closer to the 40-day mark, but they do, yep, in between the 20 and 40-day mark usually is where they're at. So it's like the third week of October, and the trimester ends right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, there is a possibility for communication between teachers and home in between, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the opportunity to invite parents to be part of the dialogue and the solution, I think probably happens more often than not. I would be very surprised if any of our staff waits. If there's a challenge, I would imagine there's an attempt to outreach, like was mentioned, even knocking on doors, that's gone above and beyond.
And I'd just like to emphasize Chris's point. I mean, you're spot on that an F to a parent should not be any surprise because they have access on a daily basis to Infinite Campus. And it's the onus is on them to play that role.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I was as surprised as anyone to find out that I think the number of parents in our community who maybe don't take that rigor is a little higher than what we might suspect. And I applaud the district for doing what they did. I'm just, in this particular year where the learning is so critical, I would love to see that even accelerated. Maybe we went, just to use an extreme, door to door after 3 Fs in 2 months. Maybe we need to go there after 3 weeks and a D for just to make a story of it, right? I'm just suggesting a more rigorous contact with the parents than what we've had in the past may be worth considering if it's resource possible, if it's possible, the resources we have. Because I was surprised that we had so many failed grades and it just didn't seem like, I just was like, where are the parents? We had 150 Fs in virtual learning through the first 2 trimesters. And that was just the virtual students. So that's a very small percentage.
I know.
And we found out that most of them just weren't engaged. Well, that makes perfect sense to me, having a high school student myself. I could exactly see how that would happen. And I'm just looking at how do we, continue to bring that forward so you can engage everybody more rigorously and more quickly with a sense of urgency, because time is against us in this initiative. We only have so much time. We can throw all the resources at it we want, and we should, but we only have so much time. So it's important, I thought, and I'm going to continue to go to the community on this, is that the parents have to be part of the solution as well. And in most cases, probably 95% they are, just to be clear.
Okay. We're transitioning from the graduation rate, which helped us show alignment with strategic goal 2, students' future success. Strategic goal 3 is student belonging and well-being. Milestone 7 measures student engagement for students in grades 4 through 12. The district contracts with School Perceptions LLC to facilitate an annual survey for all students in grades 4 through 12 to assess school climate and student engagement. Students that are engaged and feel safe at school are more likely to achieve at school at a high level academically, thereby increasing the likelihood of post-secondary success. Survey questions are asked across 7 indices, including connectedness, drive, citizenship and leadership, preparation, social and emotional aptitude, wellness, as well as academic and career planning. You'll note a number of asterisks on this longitudinal chart, most notably in the first 3 years in this chart here, this was a fall assessment. And then beginning in 17-18, where we provided the survey twice, that was where we transitioned into a spring assessment. And while we do see decline, it's worth noting that generally students answer that they're more engaged in the fall than they do in the spring. And so that does explain some of the difference between fall and spring results when you look across the chart. The data included in this chart reflects the percentage of students who participated in the survey whose average level of engagement across all survey questions was greater than or equal to 3.0 on a 4.0 scale as measured on this survey. So the goal has been to maintain a score of 3.0 or above, as it is unlikely or unrealistic that an individual would consistently rate at a 4.0. School Perceptions does provide a comparison score based on similar districts who have students engaging in the same survey, which provided us some opportunity to look at results in comparison to others, but there's, I wouldn't say that the participants are as broad as like what we heard from the ECRA comparison group, which was in the 5-some digits, 25 school districts. Opportunities to improve during this last school year, grade 6 scored themselves the lowest with the exception of the wellness index when compared to those district comparisons. 68% of students indicated that when they are stressed, they know how to cope. The same percentage as 18-19, and that was a decrease from the original 17% when it was given in the fall. 71% of students feel that there's at least one adult in their school that they can talk to about a personal problem. Middle school grades saw a decline in all index scores with an increase in 9th grade, and student index scores dropped then in 10th grade and then increase again in 11th and 12th grade when we looked at the data. So from a strategy standpoint, this is where we have strategies 13 and 14. The goal is that by the end of this coming school year, at least 61% of students will have achieved milestone 7. And strategy 13 then is to increase staff capacity in elementary and middle schools when we looked at the data through professional learning and coaching led by student services staff. And just a note or a highlight here that we do have a social emotional coach in each of our buildings with a priority focus on building students' drive. That's one of the indices, and connectedness. Those are the two areas that would be considered the greatest area of need based on our review of data. And then strategy 14 is to increase academic and career planning support in secondary schools to build students' preparation for future success. That was the third of the 7 indices where we saw an opportunity to most greatly improve results.
So strategy 14, is that Matt Wolf or someone similar trying to?
So Matt Wolf serves as our academic and career planning coordinator for the district at the secondary level, and it certainly does include his leadership, yes, and work with school counselors then in that academic and career planning.
Something similar in the middle school to what's offered in the high school? Will we try and offer programming similar to that?
I think that you will definitely, with the plans that go into this strategy, see more of a presence of Mr. Wolf in the middle schools, as well as engagement with the school counselors there. Each of our middle schools has a school counselor, as well as their social emotional coach. So there's the opportunity with student support. Our middle schools are small, having 2 personnel dedicated in each of those buildings, plus the opportunity to bring Mr. Wolf in. Will provide many opportunities for our students to work in those areas.
Great.
Do you have any idea how big the cohort is for school perceptions for the survey?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
How big the comparator group is?
Yeah,
We can ask the question again. I don't know that I asked last school year. And so it was a smaller number 2 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if it's grown, but I don't want to foster a guess.
and it's Wisconsin based, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess it wouldn't have to be, but yes, it's a Wisconsin-based company and most of their clients.
Okay, thanks.
So just to bring this full circle, I know that we had communication that today there was an administrative team workshop or meeting where you looked at this draft plan. And so the next steps are to flesh out the action plans and the tactics and the accountability and the time frame and flesh that out further.
Right, we'll be sharing it. Our building leadership teams will come in mid-August. And so we'll share during their workday with them and do some additional work with it. And then it will also be transitioned into our in-service days. Teachers come back for 5 work days prior to the students coming back. So yes, everything you said, Ms. Table, and then those dates on our timeline would include ensuring that we're engaging the building leadership teams appropriately, as well as our full staff upon their return for in-service, so that we can begin right away on day 1. You'll note one of those strategies, overarching strategies, was ensuring that we had transition activities in that helped grow students' connectedness to their buildings. That'll have to happen as they walk in the door on day 1. So we've got to be ready to go.
Does anybody else have any other questions or comments?
I appreciate that it's laid out in the milestones and, you know, even has the opportunity for us to get a little bit of, you know, financial ROI in there too.
Yes, so again, you'll be seeing this again, probably not on its own. What we will do is start to transition things like the academic recovery plan, the mitigation strategies plan that's up on the agenda next, into an overall 2021, 2022 school year plan that checks all the boxes necessary to attain the third round of ESSER funding, the federal funding that's there. So that you may not see it again on its own. Although if you want that as an agenda item, we can do that, but you will be seeing it again because it will be a component of that overall ESSER funding plan.
I would love to see it on its own, just on its own merits.
Sure.
I think it's a really great plan in terms of the breadth of it. In anything, you have to have a great plan before you can execute. Otherwise, you're building a home with no blueprint. And it sets some ambitious goals, I think. My biggest concern is, do we have the resources to execute this plan to fruition? I hope we do. If we don't, I hope this board and our community and others will help us find a way to make those resources available so that we can be successful, if indeed that becomes a shortcoming. But I'm looking forward to the execution aspect of this too, and how I was glad to hear that during this, we're going to take some points in time. We're going to go back and say, how are we doing? We're not going to wait till the end of the school year and figure out we didn't make it. Not that we would, but I thought that was a really well stated point in here.
Right. We should be able to provide progress updates at least by trimester. So this is not a plan that will get created, shelved, and revisited at the end of the year. Like all of our plans, it'll need to be flexible and fluid based on what we learn. So as additional data comes in, and as we set out and implement some of these strategies, if something's not working, we're not going to plug away at it for a full year before we change it. We're going to engage to do what needs to be done in order to attain the outcomes that we've set as goals.
While the ECRA presentation was good, giving us a holistic thing, it really wasn't surprising to me that our district is still one of the best in the nation and ranks above everybody else. Certainly there's room for improvement, but what it didn't tell us was the granularity of how many students per grade really need this help. And I would be interested in seeing a more granular breakdown of that. I mean, we know, I guess we can say the entire second grade to some extent, but one comment she made that stuck with me is even in those grades where we had excelled, that's still on average. You take every fourth grade, I don't know how many fourth graders there are in our district. I'm going to guess 150, something like that, maybe more. That doesn't mean all 150 are reading well above average. There's probably a percentage of them, a number I hope we can determine where we actually need some help. And I would be interested in seeing by grade how many kids we have in the grade and how many kids are, you know, in need of additional help, in need of have had an academic learning loss or need recovery, however you want to phrase it.
I jotted
If
that
that's-
down.
if
when-
that's
I-
not-
I jotted
if we
that
can-
down when you made that comment. I
Okay,
picked up
thank
on
you.
that.
And they do have that data. I
Yep.
mean, and they do look at it at the granular level.
I mean, for this conversation, the plan, I don't think we need the granularity, but for the next piece where
Right.
you're talking about executing, am I executing to 10 fourth graders or 100? That makes a big difference in what you're going to do. I mean, I'm not stating the obvious, I hope,
Yes.
but just from a governing perspective, I'd like to see that number, particularly in the middle school grades.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think something else that I would be interested in knowing is ECRA's report is not necessarily Wisconsin-based. We typically have comparators that we look at in our data compared to districts that we compare ourselves to in the next iteration. I would be interested in seeing how do we fare compared to our comparators.
Agreed. And that data doesn't generally come out until fall.
Yep.
So we'll get our own.
Mhm.
And then, and that'll be embargoed until it's able to be shared. And then generally, the things like the state report cards, well, the graduating class ACT scores might come out by late August or mid-September. And then by October, the state has traditionally engaged us in initial look at state report card results, with the end of October being when those state report cards are generally launched. I qualified that a bunch of times with every
Yeah.
I don't know what the reality of that will be this school year, and that everything seems to be a little bit different and more challenging at the state level, but certainly that is data that we have always looked forward to receiving. We can always learn from understanding how others are working on the same issues, and they're experiencing more success. We certainly want to know how. And it's generally been good to us in terms of being able to compare and reaffirm some of the work that we've been doing. It's unfortunate that we didn't have that opportunity this last fall, and we're certainly eager for it this fall.
Matt, I hate to come back to this report, but what you just said about if there's something someone else is doing that is working, we're eager to learn that. And I forgot to mention on milestone 1, where a highlight was 100% of second grade students at Oriole Lane achieved milestone 1, 94% of first graders at Oriole Lane achieved milestone 1. So we don't need to get into the discussion right now, but it kind of states the obvious that something is happening at Oriole Lane that likely could be learned from and applied to the other 2 elementary schools.
Good pickup, noted, and yes, we're doing just that.
I think it's also admirable that as opposed to continually comparing ourselves to other districts, which I understand the value of, all our benchmarks in this are based on ourselves.
Yeah.
Can we be as good as we were back in 2018, 2019, at least as it pertains to the recovery? Because ultimately, we're a great district. There's no question about it. I think there's almost 400 districts in Wisconsin. If we're not in the top 10, I'd be shocked. And in the nation, we're in the top 4 or 5% of, I think, 13,000 public districts. So I think it's good that we continue to challenge ourselves, set high benchmarks for ourselves, and understand that the nation has districts that would make you cry to see what their progressions are. And I'm glad we use comparison to get best practices, use comparison to make ourselves understand, what's outside of our district. But I'm glad that this whole thing was based on our own benchmarks, our own assessments, if you will. Good job.
Thank you, Doctors Joint and Clark. Next on our agenda is our COVID-19 mitigation assessment tool and strategies for the 2021-2022 school year.
Okay, so on this one, I'm going to try and get through the presentation points so that we can get to the discussion and questions at the end, if that's all right. I recognize that it's 9:20 and it gets late quickly. At the same time, I want to get the information in front of all of you in a way that it can be discussed. So if that's all right, can we push through the short presentation here?
Yes.
And then take questions and discussion at the end? I appreciate it. So we start in sharing with you the draft COVID-19 mitigation strategies for the upcoming school year with our mission. Together, we ignite each student's passion for learning, preparing for a life of infinite possibilities, and our vision, our preferred future, each student every time empowered to succeed. And want to note our commitment to healthy school environments is to maintain safe and healthy educational environments for our students and staff members, and that is of the utmost importance to us. So what we have shared with the administrative team, with the board, and then please note also been shared with our parents and guardians, our staff members in the community, is a draft set of COVID-19 mitigation strategies for this coming school year. Included in that set of strategies, I will call general mitigation measures. COVID-19 or no COVID-19, these mitigation measures are in place. The following strategies are part of local health guidance and ongoing district provisions that maximize prevention and protection against communicable diseases within our school environments, regardless of the pandemic status. So we will maintain clean and healthy facilities. We will ensure high quality ventilation, something we've been doing, all 3 of these things we've been doing, and promote hand washing and respiratory etiquette in all of our schools. So again, regardless of the status of COVID-19, those 3 things are part of our mitigation efforts around communicable diseases. When we talk specifically about our strategies for slowing the transmission of COVID-19 throughout this school year, so not mitigation measures that are implemented or taken away based on the current status of COVID-19, but what we plan to do throughout the 21-22 school year to promote healthy school environments includes physical distancing in school environments. And I am going to read the definition of these 3 because I think that the details are important to what we mean when we say that. Classrooms and school environments will maximize physical distancing to the greatest extent possible. So certainly, as we have more students come back to in-person instruction, the ability to distance like we did last year at least 5 feet will be minimized. we can maintain that CDC guidance of at least 3 feet of physical distancing in almost all cases, while instituting high-quality instructional practices that include opportunities for small group learning and collaboration. I say in almost all cases. When you think about, say, an art room with the tables in the art room the way they're set up and 4 students sitting at each of those, you think of the big tables in art rooms, the tables just aren't large enough that you're sitting 3 feet apart from one another on a side. So we are physical distancing to the greatest extent possible. In the great majority of cases, that is achieving that at least 3 feet of physical distancing. And at the same time, we're noting that we are going to expect our teachers and support our teachers in instituting high quality instructional practices that include small group learning and collaboration for students. Those are times that we have to rely on our students to be part of maintaining that physical distancing expectation as they get into small group work. Another strategy that will be implemented this school year is isolating positive cases. We did that last school year and we're successful with it. Isolation as recommended by the local health department is required for individuals who test positive for COVID-19. And here we have that learning resources will be assigned for students while out of the classroom. Note that last year in offering the opportunity for virtual learning as well as distance learning, we had a little bit more flexibility in what those learning resources might have looked like with some synchronous learning opportunities. Certainly our asynchronous learning opportunities with the support of a learning management system are better than they ever have been before. But one of the challenges associated with teaching in an environment where you have students attending both in person and virtually. And so at this point, with this rendition of the plan would be for us to assign those learning resources to students to work on outside of the classroom, limiting the ability for students to attend virtually while we're teaching other students in the classroom in person. This comes up again later in quarantine. The third measure implemented throughout the year is access to the COVID-19 vaccination. So this plan is put together in alignment with the recommendations that the Washington Ozaki Public Health Department provided, and one of their mitigation measures that they recommend is promoting the COVID-19 vaccine. And so we will inform families and staff members of local vaccination opportunities when available. We're not expecting or requiring that families vaccinate their children. That's a choice to be made by the family, but certainly the more individuals that we have vaccinated in the school setting, the easier it will be to control the spread, or the more success we're likely to have in controlling the spread of COVID-19. So if the first component of the tool is mitigation measures in place regardless of COVID-19, the second one that I just mentioned was COVID-19 mitigation measures in place throughout the year due to COVID-19. The third then component is the COVID-19 mitigation assessment tool. And the draft reads that by monitoring levels of community transmission, and that's COVID-19 community transmission level in the past 7 days by county on a scale of 0 to 100, and local vaccine coverage, local public health officials have determined a prioritized list of prevention strategies that should be considered to protect school environments from COVID-19. And I've listed those 8 measures here. I've covered the majority of those 8 in what I just shared. If we look at the MTSD drafted mitigation assessment tool, what you'll see here, and this was what was provided to you and to the parents and guardians in the community, is a COVID mitigation assessment tool attached to the level of risk designated by the Washington Ozaki Public Health Department and based on the community spread of COVID-19 over the past 7 days. The Washington Ozaki Public Health Department provides this risk level on its website. And I'll cover some data later. It was last updated on July 29th. It's updated once a week. And so in the, times of low risk, according to that rating scale, the draft plan here has face coverings being optional. And that would be optional at all levels. The exception here would be that there's a current CDC mandate requiring that all students participating in school transportation services wear a face covering while riding the bus. That would be an average of 0 to 9 cases per 100,000 in 7 days for all of Ozaki County. In the moderate risk mitigation strategies, face coverings remain optional as described before. We also would implement school-wide communication in that when a positive case is recognized in moderate risk, we would be communicating to families that are considered, or we would be communicating to the school community like we did last year that there was a positive COVID-19 case, and specific communication in the third bullet here based on contact tracing, that contact tracing happening for anybody within 3 feet of the positive case. Last year, we functioned within 6 feet of the positive case. For contact tracing in the moderate risk level, quarantine is optional. All families that are have students considered close contacts would be notified, and quarantine would be optional for those individuals determined to be a close contact. If an average of somewhere between 50 and 99 cases per 100,000 in 7 days, the health department would rate that as substantial risk. Face coverings in this case remain optional. School-wide communication remains in place. Contact tracing changes a bit in that quarantine would be required for individuals determined to be a close contact within 3 feet for a cumulative amount of time of 15 minutes over a 24-hour period, unless both individuals were wearing a face covering. And the school district would be recommending COVID-19 testing for any student or staff member, that's diagnostic testing, presenting symptoms associated with COVID-19. The highest risk level, high, which is greater than or equal to 100 cases per 100,000 in this case in Ozaki County. There would be a change in the face covering expectations. Face coverings would be recommended indoors for all individuals in the school environment. And in addition, face coverings would be expected in locations where, based on age, the COVID-19 vaccine has not been available for at least 6 weeks. We'd maintain our school-wide communication, contact tracing, and communication of close contacts, expectations of quarantine as described previously, recommendations for diagnostic testing for those presenting symptoms, and we would consider, based on our data, intermittent closures. That's something we had success in maintaining our ability to provide in-person instruction last year, and that is when we are recognizing a spread of COVID-19 within a classroom group or program, determining whether or not intermittent closure instead of a full school closure or a full district closure might help halt the spread of COVID-19 so that we can maintain the option of in-person instruction at other levels. And so you'll see by the image here that of the 8 Washington Ozaki Public Health Department safety considerations, when you add those 3 sets of mitigation measures in place and consider the mitigation strategies across the risk levels, we do check all 8 boxes of the health department's safety considerations. So I wanted to then share a little bit of feedback, as well as run you through some of the most recent COVID-19 data, as that all has bearing on the draft tool here. So first I'll look at some feedback from stakeholders. We shared this plan with our parents and guardians and had, if you consider 1 response per household, that's not to say that some households didn't have 2 responses, but in terms of just determining some rate of response, if 1 response per household, we had about an 8% response rate since sharing this. 45% of respondents noted that face coverings ought to be required in at least settings where the vaccine has not yet been made available to individual ages 0 to 11. The other side of that then would be 55%, and that 55% of parent and guardian feedback either agreed with the optional use of face masks through some levels, or didn't feel face covering should be required at all. And so I put the 45% here just to note that of that feedback, the clean way of viewing it would be to say 45% thought there ought to be more stringent expectations around face coverings. Concerns were shared by parent and guardian across parent and guardian responses. If we looked at themes, the following 4 themes were pretty prevalent. There's a need to clarify the community transmission / risk scale. Is that zip code specific? Is that county-wide? What's the risk level and how's it being assessed? I think I described that tonight more cleanly than it probably was indicated in the plan. Also a theme with questions and commentary around quarantine requirements. I noted earlier some concerns shared if a student tested positive for quarantine. Also, I'm sorry, positive and was isolated. Similar concerns for quarantine. Will there truly not be a virtual option being a question? Third theme, a distance learning option if not able to attend in person. So I'm sorry, the quarantine requirements questions were specific to, it just means more kids are going to have to miss more time. The third bullet here is a concern about a distance learning option if not able to attend in person. And then the fourth theme was the fact that the plan doesn't factor in vaccine percentages. When we look at other stakeholder groups that we shared the draft plan with regard to our employees, 56% of respondents noted that they support the idea of face coverings being optional. You can do the math and know that 44% felt the other way, and that's based on similar to the parents and guardians, but I would assess to be about an 8% response rate based on the number of amount of feedback that came back. We also presented the plan to a small group of medical experts that reside here in Mequon and Thiensville. And as part of asking them to respond, provided them a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being strongly opposed, 10 being strongly agree, and asked them for their opinion on the plan. When you average their responses, they rated the plan about a 6.5. Most of the respondents noted that they would increase their rating with more promotion of the COVID-19 vaccine and additional implementation of face covering requirements, at least at the elementary schools and or for those that are not vaccinated. So then lastly, I just wanted to provide you a quick summary, and I provided this to you in writing on Friday, but recognizing that we have some viewing the meeting tonight, again, wanting everybody to have the same information for the purpose of discussion and questions. As of July 29th, 2021, our local health department categorizes the risk status for COVID-19 as substantial. It was moderate 7 days prior to that on July 22nd. And the trajectory or percent change in the last 7 days is categorized by the health department as increasing. The community burden, which is measured as the 2-week rate of COVID-19 cases in our zip codes, something that we spent a lot of time reviewing last school year, registered at 160.5 on Wednesday, July 28th. That was an increase from 53.5 on the 20th of July and an increase from 35.7 on July 14th. Also, the percentage of positive tests for COVID-19 in Ozaukee County in the last 7 days, at least as of July 29th, registered at 22.6%. Few other data points, 2 of them. The percent of individuals in Ozaukee County that have been administered at least 1 dose of the COVID-19 vaccine was 62.7% as of July 29th. Ozaukee County is one of the most vaccinated counties in the state of Wisconsin. And note that according to the COVID Act Now website, fewer than 0.001% of people who have received a dose in Ozaukee County experienced a severe or adverse reaction. And then lastly, the Public Health Department did report 9 positive COVID-19 cases from July 22nd to 28th for children that's 0 to 18 years old within school district zip codes 53092, 53097. That's compared to 2 the previous week. So That's my overview of the draft plan that's been shared with the board as well as our community stakeholder groups. And a little run through of the feedback we've received as well as some of the data that we're monitoring related to COVID-19. And I'll pause there for the board to have some time for discussion and questions.
So trending upwards.
COVID-19 data is trending upwards, yes.
In a lot of areas in the country, I think.
So question about the medical, the people in the community, medical profession, ties, they're saying that they would rate it higher than 6.5 if we ask for more masking.
So the question was posed, where would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10?
Right.
A rating was provided. The follow-up question was, if you, what would it take for you to rate it 1 point higher?
Right.
And two of the more prevalent themes,
Yeah.
not indicated by person, but two of the more prevalent themes included promoting the vaccine and additional masking expectations, specifically in those grade levels that have not yet had access to the vaccine and or for those that have not been vaccinated.
Right.
I really wish that when we put this out, instead of just giving feedback in sort of a generic format and then trying to make percentages and put together themes, that we had actually asked some pointed questions so that we could really point to some real evidential input. And while I applaud the fact that we put out something like this and let people comment on it, it looked like, if I read that one slide correctly, only 8% of the teachers responded to this. Was that correct?
Yeah, and it was about an 8% response rate across the stakeholder groups.
So we're getting kind of a surprisingly limited amount of input. I mean, I guess what we got hopefully is a sample. My only two comments would be this. First, there's about 24,000 people in Mequon, another 3 in Thiensville, 4. So you're looking at 28,000 people in our community. The burden rates are based on 100,000. So rough math, it's a 1 to 4 ratio in terms of how burden is calculated. So with low being 0 to 9, that would be 3 individuals, and you'd be out of low and into moderate. That could be one family. And we're already into the next categorization. To go from moderate to substantial would be 13 people. That could be 3 families. So to me, it seems like the scaling as it persists, as it applies to our community, it's pretty, you're talking 28,000 people and you would be at substantial with as few as 13 individuals reporting the illness. Remember, when the CDC is giving these numbers, recommendations, and their burden rates, they're giving it for large urban populations that are densely packed. That is not Mequon. We have 1 and 5 acre parcels as a baseline for home building. We have some more densely packed communities, I guess, but not a heck of a lot. It's not like the large cities. And I guess I would just also say, so I guess I have trouble with the scale. I think the scale is too light, number one. And number two, I'm really disappointed in the Washington Ozaki Health Department. I think Mr. Joint has had numerous conversations with him, and he was spot on when he said, you need to add some complexity and some further evaluation of statistics as you take CDC data, which is meant for large populations of densely packed people in large urban environments, and localize it to us here in Mequon. The individual there either doesn't have the ability or the capability or the desire to take that information and do anything more than regurgitate it. I would love to see exactly what Mr. Joyne asked for, which is taking into account the large number of vaccinations that have taken place. 90% of our seniors have it. That's amazing. Herd immunity is, I think, around 70%, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe Akram, you would know that. You made mention of that a couple of months ago. We're at almost 69%, 68% right now, and it's growing every week. So between now and the beginning of school, I think it's logical to assume that we'll probably get to about 70%, which is close to herd immunity. Granted, you got no No real vaccine for younger children. I don't know what to say about that, other than the only way they're going to get sick is if they contact somebody that's sick. So I guess my thought would be, I'd like to see the scale, if we're going to keep this mitigation tool, I'd like to see the scale changed. Because I think 3 individuals get you out of low, 13 individuals get you into substantial, and only 28 individuals get you into the highest level. 28 individuals. The more complex thinking on this would be, where do those 28 individuals come from? Is it a floor in Concordia? Is it a nursing center? Is it one block? Is it one family? These are the complex calculations and concepts that Mr. Joint asked the Washington County Ozaki Health Department to put in play, and they have not. I don't know why, because it doesn't seem like it'd be that complicated to look at where these are and map them out, but they haven't. So I would
Yeah, but I
suggest,
think, Andy, to that point, when we had the plan from last year, right?
yeah,
You know, we said, okay, at XYZ rate, we're gonna, flip to an all virtual school setting.
right.
But in conjunction with the public health department, we did not, primarily because they were like, we're not seeing the transmission spread in the schools. I would assume we would have the same sort of flexibility, like if you said, if it was a floor at Concordia, we'd go, all right, maybe we could discount that. I don't know. Would you think that would be the?
Are we getting even that? Are we getting that from them? I get the impression we're not.
We, in our experiences last school year, when the numbers went up and went beyond the burden rate that we had originally determined that we'd have to move into distance learning, we were able to work with the health department to determine that we weren't seeing the case spread in the schools, and and we had their support in staying open. And in my experience with them last year, when we saw numbers go up, we were able to ask the question and say, where are you seeing these numbers? When they're general, you don't get much information, but yes, if they can tie them to an outbreak at a senior living facility, they did that in my experiences last year.
How is this scale different than the scale from last year?
Well, right now, the scale doesn't match, at least when I look at the public health website, the scale that we have doesn't match what they've identified as these categories, right? Because they say substantial is 50 to 99, but right now they're rating us as substantial, but our burden is about 160. So I'm a little lost on that one.
Yep, I don't have an answer to that.
I know, you're not our public health department.
The community transmission level being measured in 7 days versus 14 days does create the ability to more quickly move out of a riskier level, but also the ability to move more quickly into a riskier level. So depending on your perspective, that is either a good or a bad thing, but there's not much of an in between. That's a difference, 7 days versus 14 days. The other difference is last year with the scale, we were entirely talking about virtual learning, hybrid learning, or in-person learning. That's not a topic of conversation now. Every health department is recommending in-person learning. This is specific to tying in what mitigation measures are part of that in order to maintain in-person learning. So those would be the two key differences I can think of.
I guess the question to ask ourselves, we have 28,000 people in our community. If 30 of us get sick, is that substantial? And I would say, no,
Well,
it is
except
not.
that 30 people who get sick now are likely to be 30 people who currently aren't vaccinated, right?
Well, yeah, one would
or-
assume, yeah.
Or have already had COVID. So that 30 actually represents a pretty hefty portion of people who might not have any kind of ability to protect themselves. So, I mean, I understand where you're coming from with a numbers perspective, but our numbers are going up and they're going up rapidly. And, being able to, stop the spread. I probably shouldn't use that term since that was last year's term, but being able to stop the spread is really important, right? So I hear what you're saying about the numbers, but don't forget that could be a fairly large proportion of people who just haven't, been vaccinated or already.
Well, let's
have the
talk about
antibodies.
that. Don't they have the right and the ability to freely get vaccinated if they're over 12?
Our 2 to 11-year-olds do not.
Right, but the 2 to 11-year-olds aren't the ones getting ill here.
9 of them did. this
No,
time.
9, 0 to 18 did, not 2 to 11.
Well, okay, how many, do we know how many 2 to 11?
I don't have that.
Yeah, but I
So-
mean,
The
you know
other
what, they're
thing-
gonna get it, and I don't know, I just
I
think.
don't think you can say that. How can you say they're gonna get it? How
So
would you
the
know
other
that?
thing, Andy, you have to remember is that you talk about urban, density. I would say 80% of the 28,000 people, well, adults who live in Mequon travel to urban, densely populated areas to earn a living, if you will. They're not confined to Mequon, Thiensville. So all the adults are going out to places where there is spread, higher spread than Mequon. So they're bringing that back, so that's another way of looking at it. It's not contained, we're not on an island. So that's one way to look at it too. But yeah, you're right, that 0 to 12 are not able to be vaccinated. So they don't have a choice.
This is also typically they've been the group, right, that is the least likely to experience hospitalization and things. I mean, it's been traditionally, or at least historically, as we've looked at this disease, those 0 to 18-year-olds are, and we've had several. My 26-year-old daughter got COVID. She was out for a day or two and it was fine. And I'm not suggesting that's the case in every case, but I think if you look at the younger people, they have not had the complications that people who have autoimmune disease or who are older and have other issues, right? Plus, any adult can be vaccinated. I mean, it's a choice at this point. I mean, if you get sick and you're an adult and you weren't vaccinated, I don't really know what to say. We can't force people to be vaccinated, but we can say that you've taken your own chance at that point. And should we as a community penalize those who have been vaccinated because some people didn't want to be?
Well, I also think that our job is to represent the entire community of stakeholders that engage in our district. And I was approached by a parent who thanked me and the district, the board, for our mitigation. And what his story was, his wife has an autoimmune disease. He said, our family has had to wear masks before masks were even a thing. He said they chose to keep their high schooler at home and use the virtual learning option because of his wife's fragile condition. And it's those type of stories that come in front of me when I feel very responsible for making decisions for everyone. And they plan to send this high school student back next year based on our mitigation strategies. And I think, we do have to be mindful of the fact that there are vulnerable people that live in the households of the student population we serve. So yes, everyone has an option who is eligible to get the vaccine. Totally agree with you. Is it our job to provide information? Yes, it's our job to provide information. I think that we do that. We're apparently not requiring the vaccine. We do have other vaccinations that students have to have when they enter kindergarten. I mean,
Well, those are optional, right? You can opt out on personal choice or religious reasons, so they don't have to be vaccinated, just so you know.
but
In
you
the
have,
state, in the state of Wisconsin.
Correct.
but it's a little more strict. My only point here is we have to be very, very mindful of all of our stakeholders and all of their individual situations, and what our obligation is to serve everyone. And we won't make everyone happy. I mean,
Right.
we can't come
clear.
up with something, but we have to do what is best to keep people safe in the face of what I still will say is a novel virus. It is something that every day there's a new twist and turn and things change. And I really want to applaud Dr. Joint for everything that he has done to engage with other superintendents, with the health departments, and to really become informed and an advocate for what is the right thing to do to keep our community as safe as we can. I think that's our obligation.
Well, go ahead, Paul.
I'm gonna dovetail on what you just said, Wendy, that every day is new information, new data, new statistics. I think people would fill this out differently if we did it this week versus when they filled it out a week or 2 weeks ago. The data is statistically sound that even those who are vaccinated can acquire COVID. And what they just discovered in Cape Cod is that when they tested those who had a vaccine and came down with COVID versus those who were unvaccinated and came down with COVID, despite symptomality, they carried the same amount of viral load, which means those who were vaccinated, who contracted COVID, had the same viral load and therefore could spread the virus just as readily as those who were never vaccinated. And so the vaccination rate has become less of a bar or a measure of protection when it comes to transmission. And the science is changing daily. I'm very uncomfortable when the American Academy of Pediatrics, where the Department of Health, Dr. Joint just forwarded a newsletter at about 5 o'clock today. Across the board, especially for kids 0 to age 11, recommending masks. And most of them are also recommending masking for K through 12. I agree that we should take into account the local considerations and the unique aspect of our 2 zip codes, but absolutely to Akram's point, we do not live on an island. I can speak for myself that close family members, friends, our church, they have made changes just in the last 48, 72 hours as to new mitigation elements, including masking, that they're reinstating. So I think we're just going to see the next wave. And I personally think it would be irresponsible for us to be behind the curve in mitigation strategies and let a surge happen on our watch.
Well, I would say to Wendy's point, people have autoimmune disease. They still can't get the vaccination. In fact, that's the beauty of it, right? In the past, we gave somebody a small sample of a dead virus, or in my case, when I was young, a live virus, to build natural immunity to a disease. Now we've manufactured, engineered, if you will, I guess we'll just call it a vaccine, that doesn't take a live virus into your body. So what it has done is it allowed people with different deficiencies, autoimmunity and others, to take the vaccine. So just because you're autoimmune or you've got some health condition, in most cases, in fact, I'd say most all cases, you can have the vaccination. So in the case of the family that's got an asthmatic child or whatever, if they're of age, if they're over 12, they can get vaccinated and it's 95% effective. It's not 100, I will give you that, but nothing else. You give 1 million people aspirin, somebody's probably gonna have a negative reaction to it. We've given 100 million people or more this vaccine, so you're gonna have some reactions. It's still a good thing. I guess using this as a sounding board, what will be the end game then? There's always going to be, it's going to be like the flu. It's a SARS virus. It's like the flu. We have a flu season. There's 700 strains of flu. I wasn't wearing a mask up until we had COVID because we had a flu season. I got a flu shot. I got several, different strains covered. That's what this is going to be. What is the end game?
I think the end game is going to be when the levels of infection rate are similar to the flu, because I think that's a level that we've all tolerated. And right now, COVID is still about 60 times more prevalent than the flu. So once those kinds of numbers are achieved, that's what I think, to me, that's what the end game is. And I mean, I struggle, Andy, because, I don't want any child to get sick at school.
Oh.
I know how they are, right? I mean, I have kids, you have kids, you know how they were, especially when they were little, right? But if there's something that we can do to prevent them from getting ill, I would err on doing it. You know, that's why I'm assuming that, you know, water fountains are gonna become more bottle fillers instead of the kids actually sticking their mouth on the water fountain. I mean, you know, as we get to be smarter about transmission of things and, you know, how we can prevent illnesses of all kinds, I think we should take those into account. And I mean, I understand, you know, the kids may or may not get very ill, but man, if we can prevent them from getting ill at all.
Well, if you use these numbers, do you think we have 28 flu cases in our district every year? Because if you did, we would be at the high level. And I guarantee you, during the course of a year, maybe even during the height of the flu season, you'd get 28 cases right in our district, let alone our entire 28,000 population community. 28 cases, that's a joke. That's like nothing. And that would put you in the highest level for just plain old flu. Just to use your example of.
Well,
when it
I
gets
think
to
there's a
flu
big
levels.
difference between actual influenza cases versus flu-like cases, because a lot of people will say, I have the flu when I have a cold. But the numbers that I was looking at recently, I mean, like I said, the number of people who have died from COVID, right? I haven't looked at the numbers recently. It's probably over 700,000 now. In a normal flu year, it's like 25,000. So,
I'm going to dispute that number, but
okay.
as it were, I guess I'm saying that during the course of a year, if you're saying you're going to want these to drop to flu-like levels, my point is flu is more than 28 people in our district in a given week. I guarantee it. I absolutely guarantee it. Now, will any of them die? I'm not sure. I can't speak to that. But
Well, philosophically.
What will be the end
I
game?
think we have, you know, we understand where you're coming from, but we still have to have some sort of strategy to bring forward to the families in order to open the school safely.
Yeah, I'm looking for feedback. We've got to ultimately land on a plan here. I've got Andy as.
change
and
the scale.
I'm not trying to put words in
That's
your
okay.
mouth. The draft plan is too much. The scale is too easy to trip.
Correct.
My words for what I heard you say.
No, that's exactly right. And don't forget the people, I'm not saying masks shouldn't be optional. I'm not saying do away with masks. No, I'm not saying that. If you really feel you have concerns about COVID, wear a mask. You can wear one the rest of your life. I'm okay with that. You can wear it to school, you can wear it to bed, you can do whatever you like. Optional masks.
But
I
wearing
get
a
it.
mask protects
Yeah,
other people from me. If I wear a mask, I'm protecting all of you from me.
even if you're
And not the other
vaccinated.
way around as much. It's most effective when everybody's masked.
Okay, well, again, then I would just say to Matt's point, I think it's too easy to trip the scale. And I'd only use the flu influenza as a case in point.
So what would be your scale, Andy?
I'd double it
Double it to what?
to 200, which would be about 56 people.
And where are you getting that? How
I
are
just
you
came
arriving
up
at
with
that
that. I
number?
did not use any science behind it. I'm just thinking,
Right.
what makes
We
it
have to use a scale, Andy.
right? I
We
just
can't
gave you
We
one.
can't just wing it, right?
We can make any decision we want. These are guidelines
We
given to us.
can't. We
Sure we
can't make
can.
any decision we want.
Sure we
We
can.
have to rely on experts and people that
This
are.
group, Akram, can make a decision for our community. Us
We
7
can.
people.
And that's what we're doing here. We are making that decision.
Okay,
So,
but it's not somebody else, it's us.
right.
And I'm
But this-
suggesting we
This is
take,
an illness and we need to rely on science and data. And I think we rely on what the experts say. Period. That's my viewpoint.
well, I guess our expert is, as one constituent so rightly pointed out to us, is a third interim director or second interim director at the Washington Ogasaki County Health Department. She is not a doctor. She is not an environmentalist. She is not a public health official. She has a degree in computer science and information services.
Well, then we can
Matt-
fall back to the American Academy of Pediatrics or the CDC, who's like everybody masked all the time.
Or Matt, can you remind us the medical director at Freighted and what his advice was? I forget his last name or else I would cite his name. I'm sorry.
Stadler.
Steadily.
Thank you.
But for every
Michael-
Stadler, there's
Michael
another person who'll
Stadler.
say something different. Even the CDC has compromised
Okay,
themselves.
so
over time.
he's local.
There's other
he's-
locals.
What's that point?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You gotta
I'm sorry.
you gotta find some type of middle ground. I mean, half's gonna say no, half's gonna say yes. So what is the compromise? I think one of the things I'm most proud of from last year, and I'll stand here and say it every day, is that we didn't have a single death attributed to this last year. I said that on day one. We get to
I'm
the end
sorry,
of the year,
we didn't what?
we did not have any deaths attributed
I
to.
don't think we had any
school.
hospitalizations even.
I'm not talking about hospitalizations. I'm just saying, like, if we can get through the school year without the unknown before we started, we knew nothing, right?
Right.
All of us collectively, I mean, we can't sit here and say we knew things because we didn't get changed every day. But the goal I said was if we get through the entire school year and we know that we didn't lose a life, because others did. Other districts lost kids in a school, lost a teacher, lost a parent. We didn't experience that. So there's got to be some kind of middle ground. Like, I mean, both sides, we have to compromise in some fashion. And does that mean that it's an all or not? It's not an either or. It's a, how about together we figure something out? So if that means, things can change and things can adapt. As it stands currently underneath this draft, as I see it, under substantial risk mitigation, face coverings are optional. That's how it stands right now as of today.
Right.
Is that what I'm reading?
Yeah,
Same
yeah,
thing?
up to 99. I think it's like 50 to 99,
Right,
right?
I'm saying, but based on that, I'm not disagreeing with what you said too, the scaling, like, I
Yeah.
agree with that, the scaling's off, it doesn't make complete sense. However, if we were in a bubble, that would make absolute complete sense, that you could isolate that in a vacuum. Yeah, great, but we're not. People move, we all move, we go places to eat, we go places to shop, we do all those different things. I would also agree that the complexities, I think getting the clarification that Dr. Joint has been asking for will be extremely helpful. I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
And take that into strong consideration. I mean, you can't make a plan without being informed, right? And if we get that information back and we decide that it's helpful or it's not, to the same reasons that we had with the entire recovery plan, right? If something changes, we find new information, something's not gonna work. We're not gonna sit here and spend a year, beating our head on the wall for something that isn't proving the results. I think this is the same concept, the same idea, and that's, we're trying to split hairs and make this something that it really isn't, in my own opinion. We've got to find some way to keep some people safe. The 0 through 11-year-old population, albeit like they don't have the option to get vaccinated, while there may not be an opportunity or the levels are extremely low, that they would carry it, get infected, have whatever. Are we willing as a district to take that chance that the one time we don't do something that where we have an opportunity to, that somebody dies or gets infected or gets extremely sick or whatever that is, we prevented all of that last year by putting some of these mitigation strategies in place. Was it comfortable for all? Probably not at all times. I'm not going to sit here and say that everybody's happy and everybody's comfortable and it didn't impact all of us differently. I mean, we saw that with some of the data. Obviously, there's some unfinished learning at different rates to be caught up. But at the end of the day, we have to find some type of compromise here to keep people safe, keep that in mind to some of those constituents, find a balance that allows us to continue having in-school, in-person learning and move forward. And as we learn, we make adaptations, and that's how we get informed by Dr. Joint and others. We help support that. We have this conversation. I don't want to call it, I mean, you can call it debate, but it's discussion, right? We got to figure out what we're learning, what we're finding out, so we can have some type of way to give feedback to the district on things that are going to help protect us and put us in a position to finish the entire school year how we did last year, right? We have 2 learning modalities, let people pick a choice. Like, you can't go one way or the other and just throw it all aside, right? And just say, okay, we're not going to do anything we don't care and let the kids run the house, right? It's not how it works. You got to have something in place. So we got to find some way to be there in the middle. And if that means we have to add, make changes, and along the way, if we come back and we recommend then to the district based on finding information from those complexities or finding other information, we can do that. That's what you just said, right? We can decision-making body. Yes, we can give some of that guidance, give that as feedback, but you still got to start somewhere. You can't just start with nothing. And you can't just start like the extremes on either side. So that, I mean, it was proven that we put mitigation things in, practices in place, allowed people to stay safe, allowed students to have one of few districts nationally to even have that option for the entire school year. So at least as it stands right now, it's a starting point. You have to start somewhere. Are we going to disagree? Are we going to back and forth? Yes, but I think getting clarification on the complexities that Andy said, I think the scaling, giving a couple of those, I would agree with on some of those pieces. But I think starting with where we're at, having it optional to those that can control it. The 0 to 11 group can't, in my own opinion. I think there's some consideration that has to be discussed and looked at there. But you got to start somewhere.
Well, what do you think of the plan then, Eric, I guess? I mean, I like what you said. What do you think of the plan as it's presented?
As it's presented as it is, I mean, I think it's a good starting point. I'm not going to say anything's perfect because it's nothing is ever perfect. Always improvement and be better. But I think with what we know already from the, the 0 to 11, I don't know to what extent that optional, I think following this to, there's some type of benchmark that has to be there to be used, at least until we know more. Does that mean, I think to your point, the tripping mechanism, whatever you want to call that, kind of to scale in, scale out, there has to be something there. So if that means we jump into high risk and we have to have face coverings for a while, so be it. But if that means we go back and, another group has to be, the younger group has to have a face coverings, maybe more standard, if you will, because they don't have an option to protect themselves. And to your point with those that are vaccinated, I mean, maybe that's something we have to talk about and discuss. I don't know. So I
But-
think
So,
there's some
yeah, I
different
mean,
pieces
they're
of it.
still not requiring face coverings, even at the.
That's
at
what my
the
point is.
severe
I
level,
I
maybe, right?
appreciate that.
Well,
That's why I
today-
said, at
So-
this current point right now.
But they still can
Today,
wear them if they want.
I would like to, I would like to see mandated face coverings for up to age 11.
Right.
Absolutely.
But
Yep.
I'm saying that, and I
Right.
understand what you're saying, Andy, that, yeah, our, in a bubble, like
Yeah.
Eric said, these numbers don't make sense. But even at the high risk mitigation level, they're still recommending face coverings. They're not saying you have to, put,
I
face
think,
coverings.
at high, aren't we over 100, aren't we mandating them in this particular case, or did I could have misread that.
I
They're
don't see face
recommended.
coverings
Re-
mandatory.
Recommended in those
I apologize. maybe I-
settings where the vaccine has been available for at least 6 weeks, expected in those settings where the face coverings, or I'm sorry, where the vaccine has not been. So that would be there would be a difference in high, according to this plan, between ages 12 and up programming,
Okay,
where they're recommended,
Mhm.
and 11 and younger programming, where the vaccine hasn't yet been made available, be expected.
okay, maybe I misread that then. So are you saying that if you're in the high and you're 12 and over, it's still a recommended strategy?
That is
for
the
us?
language used by the CDC, that face coverings are recommended.
And that's what we're using in our mitigation tool, or did I misunderstand that?
We're using the term in this plan, face coverings recommended in 12 and above, regardless of setting. I'm sorry, face coverings optional through the first three.
Right,
In high, face coverings recommended in settings 12 years old and older, and expected for 11 years and younger.
so could I interpret that, just for the sake of consistency, to be 12 and over is optional? It's recommended, but yet it is not mandated. So would that be a sense optional at that point? Am I misunderstanding the?
Well, they're recommending, yes. So you would have an option.
I just want to make sure I understood that, because I guess I didn't read the fine print.
And then the word expected, is that the equivalent of a mandated?
Expected is the term we used all last year.
Okay. So we would expect those 11 and younger to be masked if we hit 100 or greater.
Yep, with the exception of those that, for whatever reason, in a medical plan or a individualized
right.
education program plan, I mean, the reality is, as time goes on, the challenges of managing any requirement are going to get more and more difficult. I'm not saying that to get out of the way, but I also want people to have a very accurate picture of what reality is. As time goes on, walking into a classroom to see 100% of students with a face covering on looks good on paper and can't necessarily be managed the same way. The school district will be subject to medical plans, doctor's notes,
Religious.
religious exemptions. And so I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just trying to be very realistic in the message that I share with you as board members. The longer this is in place, the expectation of face coverings, the harder it will become to manage.
I mean, I think we only looked at Milwaukee. to
Not
figure that out.
impossible, and with an expectation, the great majority of people would be wearing face coverings. But I can't have somebody sitting at home going, well, they expect face coverings. Every child in that classroom is going to have one. That's not fair to the child with the exemption that has one. And so if we're gonna be real and authentic about what people can expect, with an expectation in place, we can expect the great majority of people to be wearing a face covering, but as time has gone on, we're not in the first year of a pandemic any longer.
I understand.
Mhm.
So what do we intend, how do we intend to mitigate mass bullying for when we're in the optional phase, which happens before we get to high risk? Because that is something that I've been hearing a great deal about. And a lot of parents have grave concerns about their children being mass bullied and already have been, and expect that's going to be all the more so going into the new year.
Sure. Yeah, we do a policy, of course, on bullying and harassment that we'd be following when it's determined to have happened. But I think what you're getting at is we would need a pretty strong information campaign to help people understand, A, not to do it, B, what it is, and C, to be comfortable with people having a choice. It becomes about the information campaign associated with it, but we'd follow our policy to answer the very direct question, what are we going to do about it? We'd follow our bullying and harassment policy.
Well, I agree. So following that policy is reactive. From a proactive standpoint,
I think that's the information campaign I'm talking about.
yeah,
think-
I know.
yeah.
So I'm just trying to, tease that out. Do we perhaps see every classroom teacher on the first day having an open dialogue with their students, an expectation of how we treat one another? People who wear masks, people who don't wear masks, people who look different from you, behave different from you. I
Not a bad
just know
idea.
that that's been a very serious concern for a lot of parents.
And it also can support Andy's conversation earlier about information going home to parents.
And being
Like,
inclusive,
It goes
right?
home
Being
about
inclusive of
grades.
physical differences, which we have
Yeah.
all been about.
Yeah, is it in the registration packet? Is there another flyer? Is it right on the front of the website? This is an expectation of how we treat one another in our district.
I'm not trying to cut down the conversation. Those are things that we can figure out with a plan in place.
Yep.
And so I really need from you tonight more direction with regard to this plan.
Okay.
I need to know if, in Andy's case, he said, seems like too much. I'm picking up, but not hearing directly. So I'm just going to keep putting words in people's mouths. Paula, it sounds like in your review, it doesn't feel like quite enough, at least adding masking through age 11 until vaccine is available. Eric, based on your comments, I'm picking up on your perspective might be that it's not enough. Add masking through age 11, at least until the vaccine is available. I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but it is 10:20. I've shared a draft. I'm looking for direction. at
I
this
would like
point.
to see these line up better with the public health department if we're gonna talk with the public health department. And like I said, we're already in high risk according, if we're greater than 100, but that's not what's reflected on their website. So, and Chris wants to talk too. So I don't have
Chris, you don't count. her in the public.
personally, I'd rather have them masked earlier, but I don't have a problem with this plan as long as we can get some of the numbers squared away.
I agree with Shelley.
And I don't have a problem having a caveat that this plan will be updated as frequently as is medically, as soon as the science is updated, that we will be pivoting in order to keep the community safe. I am not uncomfortable requiring masks when we get to a burden rate that is dictated by the science.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
You got 3 minutes.
Couple of points. I've been listening and gathering a few points. Let me just, and Matt, I'll get to your question about what I think about the plan in just a moment. One of my consistent concerns with the kids being asymptomatic, it's likely or possible, I should say possible, that a lot more kids have had COVID than we ever know. Because they're asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, they probably aren't getting tested, right? And so if that's a fair assumption, we have kids walking around that are carrying this virus, and from the virus's perspective, they are the perfect host because they don't get sick, they don't die, they make more viruses and spread it around. So for the virus's perspective, kids are the bomb, right? But the problem is that viruses are constantly mutating. And what we're fearful of is that virus mutating and changing to become deadly for kids, right? So part of what we have to be thinking about is preventing any human being, child, whatever the impact of their disease, preventing that virus from getting in more people and mutating to become more deadly. That's just an aside. That's a science perspective going off in the background. I do like your plan, Matt. At first, I was really uncomfortable with it because I tend to be I'm a mask wearer, right? I have a science background. However, looking at the results, I know it was only 8%, but let's assume it was a representative sample. I think 10% is a good amount of return on a survey, if I remember right, my statistics. About half and half are divided. And when you and I had a conversation earlier today, I said, can we come up with an and solution? Optional, or mandatory. And I think this is a fair approach at the and. Since we can't have separate buildings or separate classrooms, I think this is a fair and, because what we're doing is we're saying masks are optional in these settings. If there's enough disease in the area, we will slap on the masks at least for the younger kids. I like the numbers lower for now, Andy, until we see what's going to happen. If it shows that the numbers are too low and we can up them, we can up them, right? Right now, I'd like to err on the side of caution because we do have about half of our community afraid to send their kids to school if not everybody's masked. It was interesting to me that both sides are calling the other side selfish, right? The optional masking people think the mandatory masking people are selfish because they're living in fear. The mandatory masking people think the optional masking people are selfish because all they're thinking about is their kids, right? We as representatives have to balance both of those and try to find a way to make all kids, all parents comfortable in our schools and ready to learn. And I think giving people options are going to release some of that tension. We might have more people actually wearing masks because nobody's telling them to. I don't want to embarrass my husband, but I mean, he's that kind of man, right? If I tell him to do something, he won't do it, maybe because I told him, even if it's what he wants to do. So, sorry. Right here. Yeah, when he sees the recording. So, I might release some of that tension. So I'm sensitive to that fear. I carry it myself. However, I think we also need to listen to the community members that think we need to give a little bit more freedom and move beyond that. So I think what you have here, Matt, even though I'm slightly uncomfortable about not masking 11 or 12 years and under all the time, I'm willing to give it a try because kids are relatively safe from the disease. And adults are, for the most part, at least in this community, have taken advantage of the vaccination process or have decided they don't want to take it, maybe, or they can't, right? So we may see even more kids masking than we did before because now it's up to them. End of my comments.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw this out as food for thought. I am very concerned about the Delta variant, the rise in cases. Chris, I really appreciate you bringing up the mutation and, you know, there's going to be other variants and the only way for other variants to occur is with continued spread. Might we have a final category of significant risk where it is an expectation of masking across the board and we don't have just recommended. Where, once it reaches a certain threshold, to Andy's point, these numbers are really diluted and low. I would hate to see us get to, like 500 and we don't have a separate category. We're still just going with mass recommended. So I think there's a lot of science and data that we can fall back on to make that case and come up with a number that is rooted in science.
Paula, what if we, even if we adopted what Matt has, which I'm still against, but nonetheless, we can always meet as a group, right? And if the number reaches even 300 and we really feel like, and people are, some kids are, some really dramatic things like Eric brought up happens, this group can make that decision. I mean, I'm not suggesting that your suggestion is not a good one. I'm just saying if it really gets to be an emergency, we don't have to rely on putting a policy together today. We meet twice a month and we can all get together if we have to in an emergency situation and say, my God, the rate's 1,000. I don't think even I would say, my goodness, there's a point where it's obvious, right?
Right? Why not be preventive and strategic? Why wait until if we never have to instigate that significant risk, hallelujah, but why would we not do that proactively on the front end?
Because we don't know, to Akram's point about me taking 100 to 200, I did so with just thinking that seemed to make just common sense. 56 people made more sense than 28. So how are we going to pick our number that's, to your point, the mother of all numbers or whatever? Seems like that might be difficult.
I understand the point, and I don't say this to refute it. One of the important bits of feedback from our experience about a year ago was that people felt like changes jumped up on them, that they were made at a board meeting and all of a sudden everything was different. And so, yes, there are school districts in our counties that announced long ago face coverings are going to be optional, and people have waited for our plan and are anxious for it to be formalized on all sides of COVID-19. What I believe makes our plan unique compared to others, and purposefully so, is that the attempt that my team and I have made in sharing a plan with you is to share with people what the year could look like, so that people can understand what that is, and there isn't a meeting where something jumps up, right? So I understand I understand the point, and I am a little uncomfortable with just picking a number, but I understand, Paula, you didn't say just pick a number. We can find something. The intent of this plan and setting up the way that it is that while we always need to come together and be flexible and responsive to changing data, we're trying to provide our stakeholders a picture of what the year could entail. And so I just want to bring up that was a true intention in this plan, and it does make us different than districts immediately to our north and immediately to our west. And I understand that that's been confounding and frustrating to some in the community. And on the other end, I haven't seen another district put a plan together that allows somebody to better predict a response to changing information. Not that it'll ever be perfect, and not that you don't learn as you go, like we did last year, right? When we didn't close and the burden was higher than we thought it would ever get. But it has been an intent of my team and I to provide our stakeholders a fuller picture, if at all possible, of what the year could entail. And again, I don't say that to refute anything anybody said, just.
Matt and board members, on the Washington Ozaukee Public Health Department site, the high, it has low, moderate, moderately high, and then high. And that high belt, the top level of that is 150. So potentially, it doesn't label what's over 150, but I could see using that 150 number above 150 as substantial. Or the term that you used, Paula.
That was the word I used.
Just a rec. just a-
Right. And that's only 50 more than the high risk. And I knew that was 150. You know, I haven't done enough digging today to know, what some of those other thresholds are. Either from the Wisconsin Department of Health or the American Academy of Pediatrics, or there's, I was looking at the Academy of Infectious Disease, whatever. Anyway, it's, like I said, it's an idea of, maybe that. We're back to mandatory. And then the other point I'd like to make, and I'm not trying to make the night go longer, but this is really important. So what is virtual going to look like for, we already said 50% of the families almost indicated a discomfort with sending their kids to school. So what are we going to do to accommodate those families who feel like we're not providing a virtual option?
My understanding was we were not, unless it was.
But that's my point, is if almost 50% of those who responded indicated that they're not sure they feel comfortable sending their kids to school when they don't know how many kids are going to be unmasked in their child's environment. I have a grave concern about, are we meeting those families' needs?
I think the CDC recommended, everybody's recommended that in-person schooling is what we want. And certainly it's proved out in terms of the academic performance. It's stark,
No,
to say the least.
I agree. I think we all want on-campus learning to the extent possible. I'm just saying, from an equity standpoint, a social emotional standpoint, are we doing all we can to meet a virtual education scenario for those families because of whatever health conditions that they're experiencing under their roof? Are they going to get an equitable education?
Right now, if a family has confirmed medical needs to not attend in person, we will connect them to what we know to be the highest quality virtual option available to them.
Good.
If a family wants to be virtual, I don't have an answer for you.
Okay.
And so therein lies the rub. We can't have the conversation we've had across all three agenda items and end up with something that works for everyone. So we've noted part of the challenge in the academic outcomes that we've experienced has been based on the fact that we have managed two platforms for learning, in person and virtual, and that we can't find ways to connect our specialists to working with individual students, to find time for our teachers to collaborate and plan for differentiated instruction, that those things can't happen if we don't focus on one. And in reality, we are an in-person learning institution, not a virtual one. And so the plan that we discussed as part of the academic recovery plan is based on having all kids in buildings. If we don't have a set of mitigation measures that affords all families in attendance to be in person, then we've got a problem, right? But I'm telling you, from an administrative standpoint, we can't do both. And so I don't have an answer for you. I have an answer for you with regard to those families that have a medically diagnosed need. I do not have an answer for you for those families that have a want.
So I have a question with regard to the high risk mitigation strategy, intermittent closures. just trying to lay out a what if. Should there be classroom closures? How will that be handled for those students?
If we have a
As far as
full
money.
classroom closure, we'll be able to transition that into a virtual setting until people are back in. The rub is on a child that's sick or that's determined to be a quarantine, especially in those early elementary grades. It is not, nobody's getting anything great when we are trying to manage dual environments in one setting.
Understood. But we have a plan in that particular instance, we will be accommodating, but we've already stated that.
We have a better means of accommodating instruction, seat work, or asynchronous learning options with the addition of the learning management system than we had in days where a parent had to come into the office and get a
Pick up
folder
the
of
packet.
work to bring home. No doubt, it's better.
Mhm.
But we don't have the ability to provide asynchronous learning if indeed we're going to engage in an academic recovery plan and handle student growth the way we discussed in the first two agenda items.
Understood.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
That is fair, and I appreciate that. I'm glad I asked the question because it helped us to tease that out and have a richer understanding.
Matt, do you have what you need from us?
I have a good understanding of where each of you are in your feedback for the draft assessment tool. I will have to circle back to my team and then probably circle back to the board leadership team to determine a timeline for next steps. But as noted with the academic recovery plan, both of these draft plans will ultimately have to end up in a plan for the 2021-2022 school year that is ultimately approved by the board in some fashion and meets all the requirements of gaining ESSER 3 funding.
When you develop the mitigation plan, what is your input on it, Matt? We didn't ask you, and I feel like, I know you're not a voting element here, but what do you think?
It's a great question, Andy. I'm struggling a great deal with guaranteeing anybody anything in what 3 or 4 weeks looks like from now, based on what I'm seeing in the data. And so I think it's important that we have a plan that people can understand how we will function as we ebb and flow out of it. But I don't think the information coming with updated recommendations and what I understand will continue to come this week has been very promising that we'll see anything in the low or moderate level anytime in the next month or so, if I'm being brutally honest.
Oh, just ask for your
I
opinion.
feel like I have ended the meeting as the Grim Reaper of all things great.
No,
I think you did a nice job putting it together. And fundamentally, it sounds like most of us support it either in all or part.
Yeah.
Paul and I may have a few differences, but we'll iron it out.
okay.
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you to Dr. Joint and his team of district directors and everyone that was involved in putting all of this together. So finally, our last item on the agenda is to adjourn. As noted at the beginning of the meeting, if community members have comments or questions for the Board of Education on tonight's agenda items, please feel free to submit those to Ms. Amanda Severs via email, and she will distribute them and the comments or questions to the board. I want to thank each and every community member who joined us this evening and to those school district stakeholders who communicate and engage with the board through other avenues outside of our meetings. Your active engagement and ongoing partnership with the school district and the Board of Education is essential to our progress as a school community. Please continue to stay involved. May I please have a motion to adjourn the August 2nd, 2021 working meeting of the Mequon Thiensville School District Board of Education?
Akram Khan, so moved.
May I have a
Shelley
second?
Burns, second.
Thank you, Akram. Thank you, Shelley. All right, now we will all vote in roll call order, starting with President Burns.
Shelley Burns, aye.
Eric Hollander, aye.
Andy,
Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew Hopkins, aye.
Akram Khan, aye.
Chris? He did,
He did.
he went.
He went.
No, it's you.
Paula Table, I.
Wendy Francoeur, aye. Motion carries 7-0. Tonight's meeting is concluded. My
10:40.
laptop died.
10:40.
10:40.
10:40 PM. Thank you, everyone, for your engagement tonight.